I'd like to call this regular council meeting to order. Before we proceed, I want to acknowledge that the land upon which we are holding this meeting is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe people and the Adirondack. We are the beneficiaries of ancient agreements, such as the dish with one spoon between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee, who agreed to share the abundance of the land through peace, friendship, and mutual respect. The two-row wampum, by which the Haudenosaunee welcomed settlers and agreed to share the land in mutual respect, and the Treaty of Niagara, considered a fundamental document by First Nations in all future relations and treaties with the British. We recognize that we have a responsibility to be stewards of the land in cooperation and collaboration with the Indigenous people, not only for one generation, but for all generations to come. We understand that we have an obligation to learn the lessons of our history, educate ourselves about the experiences of the Indigenous people, and seek opportunities to heal the wounds that will result in reconciliation with our Indigenous sisters and brothers. Many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people live and work in Fort Erie. We stand with all Indigenous people, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live. We have the good fortune to live in a land of such abundance, diversity, and beauty. Let us be vigilant in protecting Turtle Island. Madam Clerk, the invocation, would you all please rise?
We meet to serve our community and endeavor to be worthy custodians of all that has been entrusted to us. Let us be concerned only for what will promote good government. May we bring to our council chamber minds that think and hearts that feel, so that in our deliberations we may display imagination, wisdom, and courage, and the will to do our work for the good of all.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, the roll call.
All members of council are present. Mayor Redekop.
Thank you. There is no addendum this evening. I want to acknowledge that our local member of provincial parliament, Wayne Gates, is here this evening and will be a delegate later on. Good evening. I also want to remind members of the community that on July the 5th, the Fort Erie Health Save SOS with respect to our urgent care facility, there's a rally at the hospital, July the 5th from 10 until noon, and I know I will be there, and I would expect some of the councillors will be there. I believe that Wayne Gates or representatives from his office will also be there, as well as members of the Indigenous community. Next Sunday, I think it is July the 1st. Sorry, Saturday. Comes a day early this year. That's Canada Day, and that's our national holiday. It's the 156th anniversary of Canada being created as a nation. So I want to wish all Canadians Happy Canada Day. And then finally, I want to speak to a rather exciting thing that has occurred. The meeting that we held starting at 4:30 included a number of items. Closed session items relate to real property matters. In particular, and most of these dealt with real property. There were some personnel issues as well. The real property issue deals with an item that is on the agenda this evening, and the special council meeting made rather oblique reference to riparian lands. Those are lands that are adjacent to water. We have a bylaw on our agenda this evening which authorizes the acceptance of those riparian lands. Those riparian lands happen to be the lands south of the walkway, the Friendship Trail, that passes through Waverley and Erie Beach. So all of the lands where the pier, the remnants of the pier exist from the old Erie Beach Amusement Park, where the old pool is still in existence, where the old dance hall for old timers like me would remember used to be located. All of that waterfront south of the recreation trail, part of which still has to be reconstructed, has been offered for donation to the town of Fort Erie by Fred Costabile, who's here this evening, sitting in the front row. He's the young, good-looking gentleman. And, I want to put that in a context. The town of Fort Erie has been acquiring waterfront for over 20 years now. Initially pursuant to a fortuitous opportunity that arose with respect to the Rebstock property, which is now the beautiful park at Bay Beach. And then we received an opportunity to pick up 900 feet of waterfront in Ridgeway near the bottom of Burley Road, land that had escheated to the Crown through dissolution of a corporation. And we picked that up for $1. And there have been various other parcels that we've been able to pick up pursuant to a more formal policy, a waterfront policy, acquisition policy that we've adopted. This is all very important because water is an attraction for people, primarily because we're mostly made up of water. And so it's easy to understand why we would be drawn to water. I've said in the past, and I know that others of you may have said the same thing, that the waterfront here for us is part of our birthright. Unfortunately, when land grants were given by the British government 250 years ago and more recently, they included not only the waterfront, but in many cases water lots, grants that went right out into the water. This donation by Mr. Costabile also includes a large water lot because it would include the waters that go out to and around the pier and waters out in front of what used to be the amusement park. It's a significant piece of property. Many people think that the only valuable land to acquire on the water is if it's a beach. But let me tell you, there are many, many types of natural heritage features, biodiversity along other parts of our waterfront that don't constitute beach. This is a prime example. This is an historically significant piece of property because if you've been there, you know that all along the coast is limestone, chert. What was used by the first indigenous peoples that occupied this area, and we know they occupied this area going as far back as 9,000 years. They utilized the chert for weapons, but also for tools and implements. So we know that there's a rich indigenous history in this area, and the fact that it's adjacent to and constitutes the water is a true connection with our pre-European contact history through our indigenous people. It's also important from a historical perspective because we know that troops who fought during the War of 1812 were in this vicinity. And we all know that the battle at the old fort that took place in August of 1814 was the bloodiest battle of the War of 1812. There would have been troops running around up and down in this area. It's also important because when the Fenians retreated from Ridgeway, they would have gone past this area. That would have been in 1866, on their way to the old fort, where they eventually camped out in their effort to get back to the United States. So those are just some of the highlights. This was the site of an amusement park that unfortunately closed in October of 1930. It stood vacant for many, many years. Mr. Costabile is the prime principal individual in the Harbour Town development now, which is proceeding. That in itself has its own history, but we've worked to try to protect some of the natural heritage in that vicinity, and we will be acquiring several acres of land from Mr. Costabile, some of which he has to donate, the wooded area, because it's environmentally protected and because there are architectural protections, archaeological protections, and some of it we will have to acquire in order to make sure that we preserve that entire wooded area. That wooded area and this approximately 21 acres of waterfront, including the water lot, will make a magnificent park in this area. And on behalf of the town of Fort Erie, Mr. Costabile, I want to thank you for your generosity and helping us to fulfill part of the vision of this council to make sure that the public has access to waterfront. Now that we own it, we know that it will never be developed. There will never be any opportunities for any changes. It doesn't matter what government may be in office in Toronto or in Ottawa. This will be part of the heritage of the people that live in this area. And as I said, on behalf of the town council, I want to thank you very much for your generosity. I don't know if you wanted to say anything to us. We certainly would be happy to hear from you, but if not, thank you very much. Well, I did get you down to $2. No, that was extremely helpful. And I know that over the years, we've had a number of meetings. Some of them haven't been as congenial as this one, but it's all worked out very much in the end. I can tell you as well, as part of the announcements, that on Saturday morning, a number of representatives from our Indigenous community, including individuals who have worked on some of the healing gardens in Niagara, were on site, and they were quite excited about the opportunity to put up a healing garden in that area. It's close to the woods, which are almost sacrosanct to the Indigenous people. The waterfront, of course, is part of their life story. So again, they would thank you as well, Mr. Costabile. Thank you. So if you wanted to say a few words, you could come to the lectern. If not, okay, then we're happy. I will tell you that we're about to embark upon our meeting. We've got a few more things. We've got some public meetings. So if you wanted to leave, that would be fine, and then we'll formally connect with you later on. Our staff will be in touch with you. Thank you. Okay, so are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Councillor Christensen.
Yes, Your Worship. I want to declare a conflict of interest related to item 12.1 PDS 48-2023, proposed draft plan of condominium and zoning bylaw amendment, Canadian condominium, 272 Ridge Road South, Wendy McGann and Patrick McGann owners, Culture Developments Inc. /503-8257, Ontario Inc. Craig DeVries agent, on the basis that my own property lies within the notice area, 120 meters of the said property.
Thank you. Are there any other declarations? Madam Clerk, I note that this agenda, so there are no notices of upcoming public meetings coming forward. I noticed that the Regional Councillor's report is after the public meetings, and the presentations and delegations are after the public meetings. I wonder whether that's not usually how we do it, is it? Yeah. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to let the regional councillor provide his report, his brief report. His report. Councillor Encina.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop, councillors, staff, ladies and gentlemen, MPP Gates. And yes, it will be brief. The Ministry of Education has recently increased the number of child care spaces throughout Niagara Region. There was originally just over 1,900 child care spaces divided between 382 school-based and 1,569 community-based. So what has happened now is that the ministry has allocated 4,000 new child care spaces for the region, and what has increased is the number of community-based community spaces. This is actually good news for Fort Erie. In the prioritization for the areas to get more spaces, our town will get spaces in Stevensville and Crescent Park. The program is funded through the province The exact numbers of spaces for Fort Erie has yet to be calculated and released, but I will advise that the program is still underfunded, and we are still seeking more funds for the program. Niagara EMS was given funding in order to pay for 3 new full-time dispatchers at EMS. The funding has been long overdue. Right now, calls for service last year reached over 90,000, and it's estimated that by 2023, this number will be far surpassed. This is going to help prevent burnout and lessen the workload on the employees, and hopefully address some of the 911 callers being put on hold, and that has been the case. Staying with EMS, the acting chief, Farron, has now been promoted to chief of Niagara EMS. The construction of the new Niagara Regional Housing Project is well underway in Crescent Park, as those who have driven by. This transitional housing, the only one in the region right now, has received over $6 million for the construction and the operation of the housing units from CMHC. This housing will allow women and children fleeing from violence the support and assistance that they need, including community referrals and access to mental health and addiction supports. This build would not have been possible had it not been for the cooperation of all parties, CMHC, Niagara Regional Housing, and again, the town of Fort Erie. And thank you, council and staff, for your acceptance and assistance with this project, because if the zoning hadn't been done and all the prerequisites hadn't been done prior, we would not have gotten this. Thank you very much. That's all.
That's an excellent report.
And short.
Yes. Are there any questions of the regional councillor, Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Mayor Redekop, through to Mr. Councillor Insignia. Thank you very much for all the hard work you've been doing. I'm particularly happy about the childcare spaces increase. I know I put a motion forward and it was unanimously supported by council for Fort Erie, particularly Stevensville, because there really was nothing in Stevensville for the parents at this point. One of the big issues, though, funding was one of them, but the other thing was personnel, that they couldn't find enough early childhood educators to actually staff those positions. Is that still posing a problem, or are you feeling somewhat confident you'll get the staff needed?
Through you,
Councillor
Mayor.
Insignia?
Through you, Mayor. It is still a challenge. They are working on some programs for incentives. They can't come out and because there's set schedules for employees' wages and benefits, they're looking at other ways to draw people. But yes, they are looking for anyone who has some type of qualifications. And that is a bit of a hindrance, but hopefully it's going to be overcome soon.
Thank you very much.
Any other members of council? Thank you very much, Councillor Insignia. I'm going to go to presentations and delegations to move them along before we go to the public meetings. And so the first delegation is Carol Nagy from Hospice Niagara. Good evening.
Good evening. Am I okay here?
They're on, and you may want to move those
Okay.
up. You just have to speak loudly.
Okay, thank you for having me here, Mayor and Council. I think there is a presentation that I'm expecting to come up on the screen. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm here tonight to provide you an update on what's happening with the new hospice build, just to bring everybody up to level-setting pace. Hospice Niagara is an organization that helps people live well from the time that people are diagnosed with a long-term illness all the way through to the care that they require at end of life, palliative care in their own home or in the hospice setting as well, and also bereavement care for children as young as 5 all the way through to adults, and you don't have to be involved with hospice care in order to access this bereavement care. Our philosophy is that nobody should travel these roads alone, and in that way we do not provide, or we provide our services for free, so nobody has to pay, that everybody receives access to this care. Annually, we are seeing a 45% increase on the demand for our services, particularly in the bereavement area. So it is really part of the needs in every community that's driving this expansion plan. When we began planning back 5 years ago now, we were finding out that in the residents in St. Catharines on Ontario Street, the 10-bed suite hospice was receiving more referrals, about as many referrals that we were receiving, 250, we were turning away. So that wasn't a way that we were going to give services. So the board at that time decided to expand. Our first commitment was here in Fort Erie, because you will be losing the palliative care unit that has been in this community for quite some time when the new hospital is built, and we wanted to make sure those services remained in Fort Erie. The other build is in Welland. In this way, nobody will be driving more than 30 minutes away from their local hospice, which we believe serves the entire region really well. In Fort Erie, we were very fortunate to have Wilson International, family-owned company that's been in this community since 1918, step up to be the naming family for the hospice in Fort Erie, and you'll see a picture, an early rendering of this site. We are everything that is the dark triangular roof located on the site where the new Gilmore Lodge is, which is now in construction. It's due to be completed, from what I understand, early in 2024, which at that point we will be clear to start building the new hospice. For those that haven't been in a hospice, I wanted to just show a couple of pictures. One, the rooms are quite large with patio, smaller patios, because our parcel of land, we're very grateful for the region for the donation, but it's not large. So we will have patios. We've been able to maintain those, as well as these internal courtyards. When we did a lot of engagement with the Fort Erie community, just as you had indicated, Mayor Redekop, it was important for this community to have a sense of nature and be surrounded by the outdoors and bringing that outdoors in. So we have these internal courtyards that we're trying to maintain. I know these drawings will be a little bit light. However, that darkest area, this is the site plan, will be the location of the hospice, and on my right-hand side is the long-term care building, which is the long-shaped L. On the inside of the building, you'll see that there's 10 beds planned for, as this is the first floor, as well as those internal courtyards. We have at the front of the building a spiritual center which has a circle, as well as 2 rooms which are wings to it that can be used as a place for families to celebrate, to practice their own spiritual or religious beliefs when they have a family member pass in the residence. We feel this is important not only for the Indigenous community to practice their spiritual beliefs here in this community, but also for all belief systems to have a spiritual place where their loved ones passed. And in many religious faiths, it's important that this occurs where the person has passed. We also have a children's bereavement group, this room. This will be the first program of its kind in Niagara, where we'll bring children together in bereavement and be able to help them through that journey. We also have in our second floor a large terrace that opens up to rooms where we can offer people who are living with a life-limiting illness the opportunity to come to community together. At that point, their lives become quite isolated, and it's important that they come to a program where they have nursing care because they're quite fragile, but they can still be part of a community that they love. So this is the planning so far. Now, when we started this efforts, the build cost was going to be $8 million. Through the pandemic, and we all know kind of what that's brought into the construction field, as well as through shortages of labor and labor costs then, shortages of supplies, the build has now, to get to opening, is $14 million. So I'm very concerned, and I'm bringing that here today to Council. We have a public contribution target of $9.5 million. We're $7.7 million there, which is wonderful. This community has really stepped up. And of course, with that, in Hospice Niagara's own contribution, we are 82% to completion. But I'm feeling we really need some support to get over the finish line and be able to commit to building this entire building as it's laid out. Our next option, if we do not get there, is to actually lose the spiritual center, The second floor, we also, I should have pointed out, had 2 suites available for more family members and staff to stay overnight, given the weather conditions that we have in Fort Erie. We will lose those suites as well. So that's what's at risk right now in our planning. I will be going back to the Ministry of Health, who have been incredibly supportive of these builds. However, it's a tough ask to the ministry to come to the table again and provide more money on top of the 2.6 they've already provided. Once we've completed, we're anticipating between all of the hospices in Niagara, we'll be serving over 900 people in our residence, 3,700 in their own homes, and 800 people in bereavement services annually. We will have over 700 volunteers, about 300 in Fort Erie that will help to make sure that we can continue our services and programs. And we will contribute 60 new healthcare jobs, trained specially in palliative care, to the system, as well as $1 million annually to the business economy in Niagara. What's important here is there's a lot of impacts, positive impacts on a hospice, but here in Fort Erie, it's about people staying in their own community where they have been raised from the time that they're born through the time that they die. Again, as I said, we're hoping to break ground in Fort Erie in 2024 and be completed by early 26, before the services leave this community, the palliative care services leave this community, so there'll be a complete continuity of care. And finally, we experience death and dying bereavement, all of us. It's a matter of being human, but it's also a matter of our own humanity and of our society to be able to support hospice and palliative care. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nagy. That's pretty exciting, and I know that you and your team have been working very, very diligently, very hard to raise the funds and the profile of this project, which is definitely needed in the community, and we appreciate all of your hard work. Any members of council have any questions of Ms. Nagy? Councillor McDermott.
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Nagy. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that the hospice is going in here. Who is that going to serve community-wise?
All the hospices here, St. Catharines, Welland, will serve the entire Niagara region.
And out of the municipalities, aside from us, how many have actually given you a donation?
St. Catharines, Pelham, Welland, and Port Colborne have all contributed to the hospice when we asked their councils. Not, they have not given yet.
And have you made a presentation to the city of Niagara Falls?
I've put in a request to make a presentation to the city of Niagara Falls.
Thank you.
Any other members of council? Thank you very much, Ms. Nagy. We appreciate you coming out.
Thank you.
So the next delegation is going to be zooming in digitally, and Mr. Patton, that would be Jessica Dursey.
Your Worship, I'm going to move her in now.
Okay.
Hi, sorry, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can, Ms. Dursey.
Okay, excellent.
Please proceed.
Sorry, yes, this is my first time or second time being on Zoom, so just bear with me. I'm doing my best. I'm coming from home. Okay, so I'm here to thank you. It's an honor to speak with the town council, and I enjoyed everyone's presentations. It was very informative. I'm here today to talk to you about transit ridership options for town hall events, community disparities and solution, and to advocate for such things as shuttles for town hall events. As a resident of Crystal Beach and as someone who is on a low income and as a renter, I know what it feels like and how frustrating and disappointing it can be year after year to miss your favorite events, such as the Canada Day fireworks, because you do not have transit. It is important to note that there is a lack of alternate modes of transit in Fort Erie other than our on-demand service. There is a lack of taxis, ride shares, and alternate transit. Transit riders in neighboring areas of Fort Erie, such as Crystal Beach, Ridgeway, Stevensville, and Black Creek, are quite isolated from events lacking transit. That is why it is important that we seek solutions for transit riders today. Transit and events in Fort Erie. There are many events throughout the year in the town of Fort Erie. Some are organized by the town and others by community organizations. Some group events are geared to include families, adults, older adults, or other designated groups, including children and youth. To find your Fort Erie guide, Town of Fort Erie social media and other outlets allude citizens to events. Some annual dates in which transit riders year after year miss out on due to the lack of transit include, but are not limited to, Mother's Day, Father's Day events, Canada Day, events that run on Sundays and other holidays, events occurring past 8 p.m., leaving riders stuck for a safe ride home. Special transit groups that are affected by lack of transit for town hall events. Reports in Niagara on transit have pointed to different groups suffering disparity from lack of transit, including the connection with social aspects of life. Below are the groups affected, and we will briefly touch on each. Persons with disabilities, low-income individuals and families, children, seniors, high school and post-secondary students, and many other racialized groups and individuals. Persons with disabilities. Persons with disabilities are more at risk for poverty than those without disabilities. In that way, persons with disabilities both are marginalized in the area of transit from economic as well as the physical barriers they face. Low-income individuals and families. It is expensive to own a car, and many families in Fort Erie are isolated from social events occurring in the town due to the lack of transit. 16% of households in Fort Erie are surviving on a low income. Further, single mothers, single-parent families, and children suffer isolation from the lack of transit, thus stressing the importance of including their transit needs in scheduling town events. Special transit groups continued. High school and post-secondary students. In Niagara, 50% of post-secondary students are transit commuters. The needs of high school students requires further study and statistics. However, self-autonomy to use transit for events, especially when parents do not drive, is a factor to keep in consideration. Children. Child poverty is a persistent issue in Niagara. Food insecurity being an important marker of poverty, and transit intersects with poverty. Seniors. Seniors are a diverse group of transit users who can be further marginalized within society, including seniors who are Indigenous, racialized, or new to Canada. Lack of transit for town-run events. Negative effects. There are many negative effects for having a lack of transit for town events. Studies in Niagara from the YWCA, the Niagara Poverty Reduction Network, Brock University, Niagara College, Public Health, including the Living in Niagara Report 2020, point to the importance of community belonging for transit riders. Some of the negative effects include a lack of social engagement due to long commutes and non-existent transit, missed social networking opportunities for employment and volunteering, leaving low-income women and individuals missing out on economically gainful activities. Inequality between children who use transit and their peers. Social isolation has been found to damage the sense of belonging to seniors and other groups in the community, which can lead to self-harming behaviors such as substance abuse, mental health issues, suicide, and overall declining well-being, says the report on social isolation of seniors from 2014. Other Niagara communities have geared up events with transit. It is time for the town of Fort Erie to follow suit with other municipalities and consider transit riders more in their town-run events. Other municipalities have experienced success running events on dates and times when transit is available, or offering shuttle buses to events where there is no transit available, and providing a liaison between community groups and transit. Other Niagara communities have geared up events with transit, as I said. Examples from the broader community. The City of Welland's Victoria Day event 2023. Rather than hold the event on the holiday where there's no transit, they held the event on Saturday night, which was May 20th, 2023. So again, that was in Welland, and that was for Victoria Day, and the event gave transit riders access to the festivities that occurred before the last buses. So they would get some use of the event between 6:30 p.m. and 9 p.m. Port Colborne and Canal Days. The City of Port Colborne hosts Canal Days in August 2023, which is a transit-friendly event. We know that low-income children suffer from a lack of transit. And with Canal Days, they offer many family-friendly events that you can actually access wide across the region, because this event is August 5th to 7th between 11 a.m. and 5 p.m., allowing transit riders to reach the event. And further, this area for the evening concert series and fireworks, which occur at night, Port Colborne also offers a shuttle service from the Vale Health and Wellness Center, which is helpful for some Port Colborne residents who can access the locations close to home. They have demonstrated that shuttles are an affordable option in ensuring transit riders, including marginalized groups like seniors and children, are able to attend major city events without question. Canada Day, City of Niagara Falls. It is also important to note for daytime Canada Day activities that the City of Niagara Falls is offering shuttle buses to their Canada Day festivities at various checkpoints to allow transit riders to participate in the event. And their event is located at Fireman's Park. It is noteworthy because shuttle buses are being used by Port Colborne as well as Niagara Falls for important events, and that this is an option for Fort Erie to explore. And now I will talk about the positive effects of promoting inclusivity of transit riders in the community. Increasing a sense of inclusivity for transit riders in Fort Erie by including them and ensuring that they can get to town-run events, and especially important events like national holidays, helps to reduce the social isolation for transit riders, allowing them to take full benefit of the opportunities for both social and networking of participating in the town-run events. Promote equality and inclusion of children and youth whose parents and guardians utilize transit. Events strengthen the community, so ensuring that all members, including transit riders, can come to town-run events will only make Fort Erie a better place for all. Goals of my delegation. Again, I thank you for allowing me to come here to speak with you. I came here today and shared this information with you all to share the point of view of transit riders and the disparities that we face in trying to attend town-run events when there is no transit available. I'm appealing to council to work to ensure that future events that are town-run or at an arm's length will be inclusive to transit riders by invoking the following solutions, such as offering shuttles, running the main event at times during when transit is available or extending those hours for that day, and advocating to increase transit hours and availability overall for Fort Erie. So that concludes my presentation, and I would love to take any questions as they may be.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dersey, for providing us with this information and background and bringing this to our attention. There will be some expanded hours of operation through the Niagara Transit Commission, but these are interesting suggestions that you've made, and we appreciate you bringing them forward. Are there any members of council that have any questions of Ms. Dersey? Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop, through to Mrs. Dersey. Thank you for all the work. You put a lot of time and effort into this. Your presentation was very informative, so I thank you for that. And the mayor did touch on that we are looking at Niagara Regional Transit is expanding their hours and hopefully including Sundays. But since we've done the on-demand transit in Fort Erie and in the region now. The ridership has increased substantially, which is a good thing. Many more people are using it. And I think you would think that would be a good idea. That's good, that our ridership is increasing. And I didn't know if you knew, well, one of your suggestions has been implemented a while ago. I don't know if Niagara Regional Transit is following it. In the past, when there's Monday nights film festival here at the high school, we extended our on-demand transit to meet when the filming was up, because the time would be closed, and that probably would have fit into one of your recommendations.
Yes, that's excellent to know about. And I think that ensuring that there is more advertising when shuttles are available for the events, because sometimes people don't know that the shuttles are available or that the increased hours are available.
Councillor Noyes?
No, and communication is very important. I agree. Thank you.
Any other members of council? Thank you very much, Ms. Jersey. We appreciate your presentation, and each member of council did receive a copy of your PowerPoint and your comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
The next delegation on our agenda is our Member of Provincial Parliament, Wayne Gates. Good evening, sir. And I see you've got your trusty assistants with you.
Bodyguard, but I guess this is actually
You've got one of an appropriate size.
I'm not that scary.
I did. This is Owen. He's going to talk after myself. And first of all, I just want to thank everybody for having me here today and allow me to provide this presentation on Bill 23. I had the opportunity to present at both Niagara Falls and Niagara Lake Council on this issue over the last few months. Let me start by saying this. We have a housing crisis in Niagara and right across the province of Ontario. I support building homes, in particular affordable housing, but I do not support building on our greenbelt and on environmentally significant wetlands. I don't support a plan that lacks consultation and will download costs onto municipalities and taxpayers, which will probably increase taxes to all the residents. I want to thank the town, staff, the mayor, and the council for their very clear support on this issue. I think that's important. We must be clear and upfront with the province on what Bill 23 is and what it will do to communities like Fort Erie. The province has told us the goal of Bill 23 are simple: to build more homes and reduce housing costs across the province. But it's clear that the town of Fort Erie has no problem approving development projects and housing. As the mayor noted last year, Fort Erie had approved about 2,800 housing projects. The town and council have worked hard at pursuing responsible development, and I strongly believe Bill 23 is not the answer to our housing affordability crisis. Tonight, in my brief time, I'm going to comment on three primary issues: financial impact on municipalities, environmental damage, real solutions to our housing crisis. Firstly, the financial impact on local governments. The Association of Municipalities of Ontario, or as we know it, AMO, said in November of last year that they believe the changes in the bill around development charges would contradict the goal of building more housing and would shift the financial burden onto existing taxpayers. AMO, which represents 444 municipalities and has their conference in August of this year in London, has also said that the analysts show that Bill 23 would cut over, and listen to this, $5 billion in funding to municipalities in the province of Ontario over the next 9 years. Many municipalities, including the town of Fort Erie, have significant financial concerns with the use of Bill 23. Your own staff report outlined many of these concerns clearly. Quoting from your staff report, it stated, Bill 23 will have a significant and immediate financial and operational impact on lower tier municipalities due to the downloading of substantial responsibility from the upper tier municipalities and conservation authorities. Fort Erie is facing challenges right now in particular with healthcare, accessibility, affordability, and environmental preservation. When the province begins stripping revenue and downloading costs, it becomes incredibly difficult to tackle these problems. Look no further than Fort Erie Urgent Care Center. We are losing access to these services, and we know the local municipality are regularly tasked with primary care recruitment. We shouldn't be making that task harder. From a provincial perspective, our job is to support you. That's my job. We should be working to support municipalities, not download problems and costs onto their shoulders. Next, the environmental impact, which my good friend Owen will touch on with more detail. This current provincial government made no mention of their plans to open up the Greenbelt in the last election. In fact, in 2018, Premier Ford said he would not touch the Greenbelt. We know that the provincial government-owned Housing Affordability Task Force, this is their own task force, said in 2022 that a shortage of land isn't the cause of the problem, and that we do not need to build on the Greenbelt to build 1.5 million homes they said the province needs. I firmly believe, and I know the mayor and this council agrees, that our Greenbelt and our environmental significant wetlands should be protected. Our children, our grandchildren deserve nothing less. As elected officials, we must be doing everything in our power to preserve the environment, not only for ourselves, but for generations to come. We can build more than 1.5 million homes in this province without touching the Greenbelt and farmland. And a lot of people don't know, today in the province of Ontario, we're losing 319 acres of prime farmland in Ontario today. How are we going to feed ourselves and our future kids and grandkids? In summary, Bill 23 does not do what is necessary to fix the housing crisis in Niagara and across the province and here in Fort Erie. There are real solutions, but it takes political will. True government investment has the power to create affordable housing, and we must support municipalities, not hurt them financially. And while we work to increase our housing supply, we must protect tenants from unfair rent increases. We must bring back rent controls in new builds in the province of Ontario. We also must invest in non-marketing housing, creating affordable housing in existing neighborhoods. And lastly, maybe most importantly, we need to listen. We must meaningfully consult with municipalities and AMO. And with such little consultation on the actual bill, the refusal to listen to the issues presented by AMO, how can we stand by and really believe that this is the best solution to such a large problem? I'm here tonight to say I will continue to be your voice at Queen's Park. Together, we can work to oppose legislation like Bill 23 that will have significant negative impacts on the town like Fort Erie. And thank you, and I'm going to turn it over to Owen, who I think has a presentation as well on the environment. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Mr. Gates. Don't go too far in case there's any questions, and you've left Mr. Bjorgen 3 minutes.
We'll let Owen go on, and we'll take questions. Go ahead, buddy.
Okay, thanks, Wayne. All right, I do believe I have a presentation here, and once again, thank you to Town of Fort Erie staff for having me here today. It's a really beautiful town chamber you have here of all the ones I've been in Niagara. Just want to start off by pointing that out. A quick anecdote too. My connection with Fort Erie from a Niagara-on-the-Lake resident's perspective is when you remove the borders, Niagara is a whole place. It is a whole community. I remember my long drives out here to come play hockey in that arena next door. As a kid, little did I know that I'd be in this building right next door all these years later to talk about the very wetlands and forests and natural features that I used to see in my rides out here as a kid. So without further ado, that's myself up there. Thank you for loading the slide. I appreciate it. I'm here with Wayne Gates today, MPP Gates, because he is taking a stand for an environmental issue, which I will stay in my lane and speak with, because Bill 23 has lots of concerns for not just Niagara Region, but all of Ontario. So we can go to next. Is there a next slide option? Do I just say next slide or a click? Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. So my goal in the next few minutes here, without taking up too much of your time, because I really do appreciate it once again, is to kind of home in on what makes Fort Erie special and how Bill 23 has environmental implications for your community and your natural heritage, which are required to work together in order to have a functioning community. I believe the words I saw on the drive here today were growing and prosperous. It can remain that way with protecting our environmental areas. That little area of lime green in the very south of Ontario there, if it's hard to see, that is the whole point. It is a very small area of Canada, less than 1%. That is our Carolinian forest zone. We are smack in the middle of it, living right here in Fort Erie. In fact, some of the nation's most unique ecosystems reside within your municipal boundaries. To zoom in even further, in that same green area, we've got a third of Canada's rare and endangered species and a quarter of Canada's species at risk. Those numbers are probably becoming a little bit more daunting as time comes on, and Bill 23 is only going to exacerbate the pressure put on those species. For example, right here in Fort Erie, you've got the eastern hognose snake, found almost nowhere else in Ontario, still hanging out in the Marcy's Woods area. I was canoeing in Frenchman's Creek the other day and saw spotted gar. That's another national rarity of a fish. Really fascinating stuff. I could go on all day about the different species of plants and animals that call Fort Erie home, almost nowhere else in Canada, but again, that's all defined within that green area there. Niagara Region is very much so fragmented, and our natural heritage has been diminished over the years. As you can see on satellite, we have that matrix of sort of urban areas in gray. Your light green is generally agriculture, and your darker greens are intact natural areas in the form of forest coverage or wetlands. And it is to my understanding that Fort Erie as a municipality actually, per capita, based on its size geographically and its population, has more provincially significant wetlands and locally significant wetlands than any of the other municipalities in Niagara Region. That is a gem that you should be proud of here in Fort Erie. I can't say that's the current case for myself living in Niagara-on-the-Lake, for example. So that's why I've always found this area fascinating. And again, to put it into context, we have less than 1% of Canada's land area. This ties in very well with what MPP Gates was saying earlier. We have a quarter of Canada's human population living in that green shaded area too. With population growth quotas coming to Canada, Ontario, and the Niagara Region, with the boom and the grow of development in Fort Erie, we have to be very careful with how we protect our Carolinian forest and natural heritage, because by protecting that, it protects your communities. So just to give you a couple scenic shots here, not to take up too much of your time with them, but just up the road here, we've got the Niagara Gorge. That is a textbook Carolinian forest site with record-breaking numbers for both fish species and bird species logged around the corridor. There are 2 species of salamander that live on the walls of the gorge, yet nowhere else in the province. And again, just to kind of home in on towards Fort Erie too, you have species like that here as well. We have waterfalls in Niagara Region that still don't have a proper name that people can barely get to. That was a tricky one. I think I'll visit that waterfall once in my life because it's a little bit scary to get down there, but it goes to show you we still have hidden gems in Niagara, including these 2 photos, which funny enough were taken in Fort Erie area, South Niagara, and we have our blue spotted salamanders, for example. All these really interesting features that, again, even if we were to take biodiversity stats out of it, as MPP Gates said, this is for our children. Well, this natural heritage and natural wonder is for the next generation. It sounds cheesy, but it is scientifically true that the more we allow the next generation to bond and experience these sorts of things in the environment, the more inclined they will be to protect it and vote for these sorts of protections moving forward.
Excuse me, Mr. Bjorgen, how much longer do you anticipate you'll be?
I think a couple minutes. I'm going as fast as I
Can I have
can.
a motion to extend for another 3 minutes?
Yep, I think that can wrap things up. Thank
Councillor
you.
Lewis, Councillor Christensen, all those in favor? That's carried. Please proceed.
Thank you. Much appreciated, Mr. Redekop. This photo here, also taken in what most of South Niagara looks like, your provincially significant wetlands, which you have plenty of here in Fort Erie by Niagara standards. I heard you had a big storm here today. Is that true? These wetlands are the protection services, your free protection services for flood control, erosion control and prevention. So that not only helps your communities, it also helps your agricultural communities too, at keeping more soil on the land, keeping that quality soil nearby for your agricultural areas. So you need wetlands not just from a biodiversity perspective, but from a community function perspective too. So just to kind of go through these questions, we won't have to pick them all apart time-wise, but something to think about as council is how could your municipality, as MPP Gates explained also in a more financial kind of perspective, how could that be impacted by the removal of greenbelt and protected ecosystem protections through Bill 23? What's at stake for you here in Fort Erie? What cultural and local barriers exist to taking action? Why should we bother or care? Depending what lens you want to look at it, there's an economical and a natural heritage side to this. What's next and how can we act versus just having meetings about it? So my pun of the day is a belt that is something that holds things up to avoid embarrassing and avoidable consequences. And that's why we had the green belt. But with Bill 23, it's not just green belt areas. It's also stripping powers from conservation authorities and expediting development processes. My fear is that would be environmentally disastrous, and there would go a lot of unchecked environmental consequences would come up because of that. As they say, decisions made now will impact the next generation of wildlife and humans alike, and we can save ourselves quite literally millions of dollars in the process because those ecosystems have better value standing than destroyed. So on that note, I just want to thank you once again, Council, for having me here today, and again to MPP Gates for allowing me to come out and speak on the environmental angle of these things. I could go on and geek out about how amazing Fort Erie is all day. Beaches, wetlands, Niagara River, a lesser known version of the Niagara Escarpment, the agriculture, the beautiful communities. It all is connected together, and it is all built on the foundation of our natural heritage. So I'll leave you with that thought for the night, and thank you once again.
Thank you very much. And before you go, there may be some questions by members of council. Are there any members of council that have any questions? I have a question, and that is, can you provide us with a copy of your presentation, or do we already have that?
I believe you already have that.
Okay, so you'll be able to circulate that?
Yeah. You're welcome to share,
Madam Clerk?
circulate, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much. Since there don't appear to be any questions, I would suggest that next time you and MPP Gates appear together, you speak first so you can take up more time.
I'll let you two work that out. Yeah.
We have worked it out. I get to go first in Fort Erie.
Listen, this is my third municipality I've been to, and you're the third mayor that said that, so I'm kind of used to it. It's okay, it's all good. Thanks very much for listening, and it is a very serious issue, even though we're laughing now.
Yeah.
I really think that you should do everything you can to protect our environment, and we should get as many homes built for our kids and our grandkids, but let's do it the right way, and Bill 23 isn't the right way. So thanks for having me, I really appreciate it. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you again, appreciate it.
So we don't usually clap or boo in this chamber. We did when Mr. Costabile made that generous donation. That was kind of exceptional, and we generally clap if there are students or individuals who are receiving awards. Just, we try to keep it calm. Okay, Ms. Young, you've been waiting patiently because I believe you have both of the public meetings tonight. And it's nice to see you. So the first public meeting that we have on the agenda is the proposed zoning bylaw amendment for property on Lavinia Street. And it will be a hybrid meeting. It's a public meeting under the Planning Act. Ms. Young will be providing some background information to members of council. Members of council can ask her questions if they wish. Then I will ask the owner or the agent's owner to provide any comments to council that they may wish to provide. Then I will ask if there's anyone who wishes, other than the owner or the owner's agent, who wishes to speak in support of the application to come forward. Following that, if there's anyone who wishes to speak in opposition or ask members of council questions, I will ask them. I will then go to Mr. Patton to advise whether there's anyone digitally who wishes to come into the meeting to address council. And if you are wanting to come into the meeting, please raise your hand at the appropriate time. And then finally, I'll ask the clerk if we've received any correspondence since the preparation and publishing of the report. Excuse me. So with that, Ms. Young, would you like to proceed?
Yes. Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council. Just want to make sure, can everyone hear me well?
Just speak up a little bit more.
A little bit louder? This? Okay. Okay, so we have the presentation. We're good to go. So the purpose of this public meeting is to provide information and staff recommendation to council regarding the proposed zoning bylaw amendment for the lands known as 0-1215 Lavinia Street. The application was submitted by the agent Amy Perel from Perel Planning and Associates on behalf of the property owner Venancio Ping. The applicant is requesting to rezone the subject property from residential 2 zone to residential 3 zone to facilitate the construction of a semi-detached dwelling. A recommendation is being presented to council the same evening as the public meeting because there is a low level of interest from residents in the area, and the proposal complies with the town's policies. Notification of today's public meeting was provided in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act by providing a notice in the June 1st, 2023 edition of the Fort Erie Post newspaper. In addition, all property owners within 120 meters of the subject property were mailed a notice of complete application and public meeting on the same day. The timeline of this application is as follows. A completed application was deemed on April 28th of this year, followed by a public information open house on May 25th, and a statutory public meeting and staff recommendation report is being presented today to council on June 26th, which is shown in red. If the application is approved by council, the next step will be the approval of the amending bylaw, followed by the 20-day appeal period that will take place in July and August of this year. In accordance with Bill 109, a combined official plan and zoning bylaw amendment is subject to a 120-day processing and review timeline, which begins when town staff receives a completed application. As of today, we are on track with the timeline, as the application is on day 60 out of 120 days. The subject property is located in the south end neighborhood of the town of Fort Erie. The subject property is on the south side of Lavinia Street and east of Battery Street. The subject property has a lot area of 917 metered square and have a 20 meter of lot frontage. The properties surrounding land uses are to the north, there is single detached, and then there is also duplex dwellings, which is highlighted as multi-residential dwelling units on the map here. To the south of the property, we can see some more single detached dwellings, as well as a fourplex dwelling. Also, there is duplex, sixplex, and mixed uses to the east. And then to the west, there is more single detached and semi-detached dwellings. The subject property is designated low-density residential in the South End Secondary Plan. This designation is reserved for land uses including single detached, semi-detached, and duplex dwellings, and uses accessory thereto. The secondary plan indicates the neighborhood has a targeted mix of 70% for low-density built form and permits a medium-density development on lands designated low-density residential through a zoning bylaw amendment. The proposed development aligns with the secondary plan as it will introduce gentle and residential intensification in the urban area. It will have access to existing municipal services, and it will contribute to the 70% residential target for low-density development. Additionally, the subject property is also identified within an area of archaeological potential and is located within the Peace Bridge zone of sensitivity, as shown in Schedule D and D1 of the Town of Fort Erie's official plan. A Stage 1 and 2 archaeological assessment and a ministry letter of acknowledgement were submitted with this application and have been reviewed satisfactorily by the Niagara Region. The subject property is not impacted by natural heritage features in accordance with Schedule C and C1 of official plan. The subject property is located within a resource area in accordance with Schedule B, and town does have policies that require a 75-meter setback from these resources, such as wells, for their protection. Staff note that the property is not within the 75-meter setback. The subject property is zoned residential 2 zone in accordance with the Town of Fort Erie's comprehensive zoning bylaw. The permitted uses with this zone include single detached dwellings and uses accessory there too. So to facilitate this proposal, the applicant is proposing to rezone the subject property to residential 3, which permits the construction of the semi-detached dwellings on the property. Okay, here is an image of the site plan. The semi-detached dwellings will be fronting on Lavinia Street with parking on the driveway and in the garage. The chart here indicates the standard R3 zone regulations and the proposed associated measurements to facilitate this proposal. The proposal meets all the zoning provisions of the R3 zone for semi-detached dwellings. The proposal will result in an appropriately sized dwelling with suitable amenity space, on-site parking, and access to existing municipal services. Further, the owner is proposing to construct accessory basement apartments in both of the units in the basement of the semi-detached. The units will be accessed with an entrance on the side of the building. The R3 zone permits accessory apartments as a use, and it is regulated by Section 6.43 of the zoning bylaw regarding the minimum floor area, the number of parking spaces, and any landscaping requirements as well. However, on November 28 of 2022, Bill 23, More Homes Built Faster Act, received royal assent. The bill allows 3 as-of-right residential dwelling units to any parcel with a single detached dwelling, semi-detached dwelling, or townhouse dwelling provided. 1 parking space can be provided per dwelling unit. Further, the bill prohibits any regulation regarding the minimum floor area. However, this doesn't regulate the building design and the landscaped area. So to ensure the proposal is compatible with the surrounding neighborhood, the owner is proposing to have a landscape of 42% of the front yard. So this way they are in compliance with Section 6.43 of the zoning bylaw as well. The proposal will also provide 2 on-site parking spaces, as I've mentioned, 1 in the garage and 1 in the driveway, and amenity area in the rear yard for future residents to enjoy. I do note that tandem parking is permitted. And then here's a conceptual rendering of the proposal. And then here is an image from a site visit. It is currently vacant. A public information open house was held by town staff and the applicant in the atrium of Town Hall on May 25th. There were 4 members of the public who attended this meeting, and no written concerns or comments were received by staff. In summary, local residents expressed concerns regarding the determination of the dwelling height due to the existing slope on this property. They had concerns with how high it would be. In discussion with the applicant, the proposed semi-detached dwelling will give regard to the measuring method as outlined in the zoning bylaw, and it will conform with the maximum 9 meters building height as set out in the R3 zone. So in conclusion, planning staff are of the opinion that the proposed zoning bylaw amendment application would make efficient use of an underutilized infill lot within an existing neighborhood. The proposal will provide an appropriately sized dwelling with adequate parking on site and maximize on existing municipal services. It is consistent with the intent of the South End Secondary Plan and aligns with the vision of the neighborhood. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Young. Those are very comprehensive comments with respect to this matter. Any members of council have any questions? Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. Through you to Mrs. Young. Yes, it was a very good presentation. My question is about the parking, and I know it meets the criteria of the Bill 23 and that. But when I'm reading the narrative that we have here, there's basically 2 parking spots for each townhouse, right? One is in the garage and one is in the driveway. So the driveway itself is there enough room? Like, it looks like it's a double driveway.
If you don't mind, I'm just going to go back to the site plan here. so I can show you visually as well. I know. Oh, okay. Okay, through your worship to Councillor Noyes. So just to clarify on your question here, you're wondering whether or not the parking space in the driveway is sufficient for one parking?
I'm concerned that, okay, because there's someone who's living there's a unit in the basement and there's a unit on the main floor, so there's two people living in each. And I'm concerned that, and I know that the province says this is fine, but if the one parking spot is in the garage and there's only one parking spot in the driveway, and I happen to live in the garage, and the person who's parked in the driveway happens to be out for a walk and walking his dog, how am I going to get out?
Okay, through your mayor to Councillor Noyes, I understand the concern here because it will take some coordination between the property owners in this case and the tenants, or if they choose to rent it out. That's a very good question. I think it is
It meets the criteria.
It does meet the criteria of the required parking spaces. That's we do permit tandem parking in this case, one with the parking in the garage and then one in the driveway. It will take a little bit of coordination between the property owners to hash that out in terms of moving the vehicles to have access.
I guess if I can continue,
Yeah.
is there any possibility of perhaps making the driveways themselves wider and having less landscaping? Like, in other words, is that at all possible or not? And I guess the way the layout is, maybe not. Is there any room to kind of make it any wider?
To make it,
The driveway wider?
so right now, that is something that we can discuss with the applicant. They are currently in compliance with the landscaping requirement with the 42, and if they wish to meet it right at the 30% requirement, just to widen the driveway to allow for a little bit more of a wiggle room. That's something that we can bring it up with the applicant to see if it's possible. Alternatively, the parking requirement is 6 meters by 2.7 meters in dimension, so it does fit a standard size vehicle on the property, but definitely we can explore some other options. I will also note that the property line does take up a little bit of the existing driveway, so when you're there at the property, it's kind of set back a little bit more based off of the site plan that we can see. Where my mouse is, this is also part of the proposed driveway, so it will be a little bit longer than what we will be calculating as part of our site plan and zoning review. The 6 meter is only to the property line.
Thank you very much.
Any other members of council? Councillor Flagg.
Thank you, Your Worship, and certainly this won't be, I hope it won't be as tough to answer as the last one. Just for my own personal knowledge, when I received this proposed zoning bylaw, I was trying to figure out where 1215 Lavinia Street was in Fort Erie and how that numbering comes to play, and I'm wondering whether you could refer to slide 4 and try to explain how the numbering.
Okay. Through your worship to Councillor Flagg. So the numbering on this property here, the subject property is vacant. So the number is 0 in our systems until a house is built, usually through the building department or the building stage. A municipal address will be provided. at that time. But we do have internal labels for vacant properties. So in this case, it would be 0-1215 Lavinia Street.
Thank you, I appreciate that, Ms. Young.
In other words, you have to know the secret handshake, Councillor. Any other members of council? Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Young. So I'm now going to ask the owner, the proponent, or the proponent's agent if they wish to address council.
Yeah.
Are they doing that digitally?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I'm going to move them in now, Your Worship.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Can everyone hear me okay?
We can, Ms. Powell. Please proceed.
So thank you everyone for having me here in attendance today. I as well created a presentation. Much of it would be a duplication of Samantha's very thorough presentation, so I'll do my best not to create a duplication of content here today. Is my presentation available up on the screen for viewing?
Mr. Patton, can you do that? It's up on our screen now, Ms. Powell.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So I'll begin with my presentation. And again, I apologize for duplication when it comes to planning policy matters. There's often, in the case where staff does support the file, there can be a bit of duplication. So I'd like to start with saying good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council, staff, and members of the public in attendance. My name is Amy Powell, and I'm the Chief Planning Officer for Powell Planning and Associates. I'm also a registered professional planner and the agent representing the landowner, Mr. Venancio Penge, at this evening's public meeting for application ZBA 04-2023. This is an application seeking to rezone the lands located at 0-1215 Lavinia Street to allow for a semi-detached built form on the subject site. This application is being submitted in accordance with the Town of Fort Erie zoning bylaw 129-90. Next slide, please. So for this evening's presentation, I will be reviewing the subject site's location, as well as its characteristics, providing a summary of the file's history, identifying how the subject proposal conforms with the township's official plan and zoning bylaw, as well as describing the subject development, identifying the requested change of the zone through the zoning bylaw amendment, providing conclusions on the overall application, and both myself as well as the landowner would then be happy to answer any questions on the subject application from members of council or any members of the public in attendance. Next slide, please. So with regards to the site location as well as its characteristics, the subject site is located on the south side of Lavinia Street in between Battery and Waterloo Streets in the south end secondary plan area. The site is approximately 0.22 acres in size with access fronting onto Lavinia Street. The lands, as previously noted, are municipally serviced for water and wastewater, and they slope towards the north and the east portion of the sites, and they have several perimeter trees that are currently on site. The lands are designated as urban area and within the built-up area in the region of Niagara's official plan. These designations foster residential development of varying densities, which is well achieved by the subject development. The Town of Fort Erie's official plan identifies that the subject lands are within the urban boundary, and the South End Secondary Plan designates them as low-density residential. The subject site is also within the Peace Bridge Zone area sensitivity, an area where archaeological assessments are required, where development is being proposed. The lands are zoned residential 2 or R2 in the town zoning bylaw 129-90. These designations and zone align with the development being proposed through this application, as the site as well as the surrounding area are highly compatible with the proposed use, which is residential infill and intensification in an undersupplied housing market. The lands are currently vacant, where there's a subject application which seeks to bring a higher and better use to the site that is sympathetic and contextually appropriate for the neighborhood, which also aligns with not just local planning policy, but as well as those at the provincial level as well as the regional level. The lands, as previously mentioned, are surrounded predominantly by residential uses that include a variety of densities where duplexes and multiplexes are currently present. Just to go into, the next slide, please. For a brief file history. So we did meet with town staff in December of 2022 to fulfill the town's pre-consultation application process. Through that process, the application was required to propose or to provide a number of elements to be before staff for further consideration and to deem the subject application a complete application. So we were required to provide a zoning bylaw amendment as well as the previously noted stage 1 and stage 2 archaeological assessments, which concluded that no further assessments were required in terms of on-site archaeological resources. We also submitted a planning justification report, a site plan with a zoning matrix, conceptual elevations and renderings so that staff could determine, what the feel and use of the proposed structure would look like in accordance with the surrounding neighborhood. And then ultimately, depending on council's decision moving forward, the next steps for this application would be before committee, where we would be seeking we would have to move forward with a pre-consultation application for committee's consideration of consent applications in order for the semi-detached lots to be created. So as Samantha noted, we submitted an application in March 2023. It was then deemed complete at the end of April of 2023, and we participated in orchestrating a open house at the town's admin center on May 25th of 2023, where staff, myself, as well as the landowner were able to meet with surrounding neighbors to discuss the proposal's details and address any comments and concerns at that time. Next slide, please. This slide highlights just the, again, applicable designations from the town's official plan that apply to the subject site, which are low density, as well as the Peace Bridge zone of sensitivity. Just a summation of my comments from how this application well meets the intent of the official plan. It's an application which really does better utilize an existing vacant lot where residential uses are meant to occur. We're looking, again, through this application to seek a higher and better use so that we can not just develop the lot kind of as of right with a single detached house, but better meet that housing desire and the crisis that's before us, where there's a potential for the development of 4 units on this lot to be created. We believe, all things considered, with policies in the town's official plan, as well as the upper tier policies for how growth and development are meant to occur, that the subject application conforms to local as well as regional and provincial policy and ultimately represents good planning in accordance with these policies. Next slide, please. In accordance with the subject zone, as previously mentioned, the lands are zoned R2. Through this application, we're seeking to upzone the lands, if you will, to allow for semi-detached structures, where we would be seeking the R3 category. It's important to note here to council, and understanding that there are a number of applications similar in nature coming before council for consideration of that R3 zone. This file is quite unique in that we don't require an amendment to any of the other standards. So we can we can apply the building typology that's been presented in the site plan without seeking relief from any of the standards of the R3 zone, which we think is a really unique attribute of the application that's before council this evening. Next slide, please. So with regards to this subject development, the subject site measures 45 meters by 20 meters, where the proposal is for, again, 2 semi-detached units are being offered. The application before council seeks to change the current zone, again, from R2 to R3 on the subject lands to allow for semi-detached units to be created, where the site, again, is currently vacant. So each house, if you will, each structure or semi-detached will be a 3-bedroom unit for the lower floor and then the upper floor, and then we're anticipating creation of a basement apartment in the basement. So for the above grade, if you will, we're proposing a 1,500 square foot unit amongst stories 1 and 2, and then the basement will be approximately 670 square feet in size. There will be 1 interior parking space and 1 exterior parking space. As council's already discussed, their request for clarification and concern with parking that's on site. But as Samantha alluded to, we've put together a strategic application that does meet the local and the provincial standards for how parking is to be addressed. But we are happy to entertain an amendment to the width of that driveway to allow for ease of access for vehicular uses. However, as the presentation demonstrates and as the application attests to, that there are 4 parking spaces that would be on site for the respective units. Again, I emphasize that all zoning standards will be respected through the proposed application, allowing for adequate frontage, as well as a positive contribution to the existing streetscape, as well as a generous rear yard for amenity space for future residents. The proposed materials are at this point meant to be brick and siding to allow for continuity of the existing built form and to blend quite well and nicely with the existing character of the neighborhood. With the creation of these 2 semi-detached units, we also require consent, as previously mentioned, and those applications would be contingent, of course, upon council's decision at the hearing or the public meeting this evening. The site does benefit from, again, existing municipal water and wastewater, as well as waste collection services, and it's not anticipated that if any additional tree clearing is required, it would not be extensive in nature. Next slide, please. So this is just the schedule that's been presented to staff, seeking an amendment change again from the R2 to the R3 zone to again only allow for that additional permitted residential typology, which is the semi-detached use. And we can just go to the next slide, please. So in conclusion, overall, the zoning bylaw amendment application offers a highly compatible development in accordance with the surrounding neighborhood's context. We are currently in a state where housing is a desired land use to help address the regional and local housing affordability crisis. One way to address this crisis is to add more housing, but particularly in areas that are serviced, where communities are well established, so that residents can make better use of existing infrastructure, such as schools, roads, water and wastewater, parks, and other community uses. Adding housing inventory without having to negatively alter the physical character of a neighborhood is an ideal way to meet growth targets and address housing affordability in accordance with the province. However, in accordance with one of the deputations made earlier this evening, this application does not push that development envelope to the limits as outlined in Bill 23. This development is notably sympathetic in its strategic design, where 4 residential units can exist, whereas perhaps traditional planning would have only allowed for 1. And this will not cause a strain on services or an interruption to the character of the neighborhood. Additional bonuses. The requested archaeological impact study has been completed, and it concluded that there would not be a negative impact on archaeological resources from the proposed development, another strength of the proposal that's before council this evening. We understand that staff have completed their review and circulation, and there appears to be support of the application from their perspective across a number of departments. We're very grateful to staff for their diligence in taking and working alongside this application and with their successful positive recommendation to council this evening. We understand that the building typology being presented is a newer one to the area. It's something that's more emerging, and it's more common amongst some new as well as redevelopment projects, as it aims to maximize site potential very strategically. It's my professional planning opinion that the subject application is compatible with all applicable policies and standards, as well as the character of the neighborhood and the on-site characteristics. We're requesting for a zoning change from R2 to R3 to allow for a semi-detached built form that is already present in the surrounding community. This successful application will facilitate the development of a highly desired and appropriate use. We again thank everyone for their time this evening, to staff for your review of the subject application, and we're happy to answer any questions on the subject file as able. Thank you again.
Thank you, Ms. Powell. Do any members of council have any questions? Councillor Flagg.
Ms. Powell, I understand that you listened to the first presentation and heard the concern about the parking. There's a considerable depth on the backyard of that property. Would that house be able to move deeper in the yard and allow more parking in the front to alleviate any parking concerns?
Ms. Powell?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, I don't know the councillor's name.
Councillor Flagg.
Councillor Flagg. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Flagg. Thank you very much for that comment. The site plan is very telling, isn't it? There is definitely a generous rear yard that exists from the presentation as being identified from the site plan. So that is something that I believe the landowner would absolutely be open to. The design before council this evening more so meets the minimum standards, if you will, and maximum standards in some respects of the zoning bylaw. And we're also cautious about urban design principles with not having too much of the front of the house kind of be dedicated to vehicular views. But I completely agree that it's a strategic way to perhaps better accommodate on-site function for vehicular use, as well as still keep the integrity of the site. So if staff would just advise, what that resubmission process would look like, we would be happy to oblige in that regard. Thank you.
Councillor Flagg?
Thank you, Ms. Powell. I'll leave that between you and Ms. Young.
Any other members of council? Ms. Powell, I'm looking at a Google map photograph of the site. Looks like there's been some recent removal of topsoil. You familiar with that?
To you, Mr. Mayor, I myself am not, but I believe we also have the landowner on the call who could perhaps better speak to some on-site earthworks. I'd have to leave that with staff to be able to log him in.
Sure, that'd be fine. I think maybe that's information that can be passed on to Ms. Young. It doesn't have to be tonight.
To you, Mr. Mayor, I see that the landowner has been able to log on, so he could perhaps readily address that comment here.
Okay.
Venancio, are you able to unmute?
Can you bring him in, Mr. Patton?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Everyone. Yeah, to the fill that has been removed, that was done approximately 3 years ago, and that was done in order to make suitable arrangements to get a plan that would fit on the property due to the configuration of the lands.
Just so that I'm clear on that, you had to remove the topsoil in order to come up with a conceptual plan as to what could go on the property? Is that what you just said?
Well, actually, yes. Well, we actually pushed it to the rear of the property is what we ended up doing.
So all the soil is still on site?
Some of the topsoil, the fill was cleared away. There was several loads of just topsoil, and the remainder was fill, and that was trucked away.
And was did you have to get any permission from the municipality to remove soil from the site?
No, I believe we had a pre-con meeting, and they had covered all the particulars of what was required, and there was no requirement that we couldn't remove any fill at that time.
Was that an issue that you raised at the pre-consultation meeting?
Well, I don't recall. I don't have that issue here, but it was brought up in the past that when the archaeological assessment was required, I'd explained what took place.
You explained that to whom?
That would have been the planner. It wouldn't have been Samantha. Would have been the previous planner that was working on the file that had arranged for the pre-con for this property.
Okay, we can check the pre-con notes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other members of council have any other questions? Thank you very much, Ms. Powell, Mr. Pingay. So that takes us to the next portion of this meeting, and that is anyone other than the owner and the owner's agent who wishes to speak in favor of the application. Mr. Patton, is there anyone in the digital waiting room that might wish to address council? Okay. Is there anyone who wishes to address council or speak in opposition to the application? Please come forward, sir. Hi, may I have your full name and address for the record, please?
Of course. My name is Mahdi Ismail. I'm living in 46 Lavinia Street.
What is your last name?
Ismail. E as echo, S as Sam, M as mom, A as alpha, E as echo, another E as echo, L as lime, P as pot, O as ocean, U as umbrella, or as a red.
Okay, the clerk can pick that up later. Thank you. Please proceed. And your address? I'm sorry.
46 Lavinia.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Actually, I'm here to go against this one, and first I would say it's not a good thing that's happening. There been some stuff, they show some pictures, but it's obvious when you're looking at those pictures that that plant is not supposed to be in that land. They show that if they are another room tree over there, but if you look at, they are exactly in the corner. But the land that next to us, and they're supposed to make this building over there, at first it is like the hill. That's 9 meter with the two, actually if they're going to two level, it's going to be like no sun fall off, and all front end become like the back. That's the first thing. And then about the parking. So they said, okay, one parking is enough. But right now we have a situation that the house front of us, they rented 2-3 people and they parking in the street. So it's going to be happening because they are going to rent it and they are all going to
park in the street, and it's really hard for me in the winter. We are living for 2 years here, and every winter I want to come out with the car. It's not possible for me because the city cannot clean those roads, just the street, because the car park all the night over there, and we always have this problem over there. It's not going to be solved with, adding another house over there, make it worse. And it's not just my vote, all the neighbors, they are worried about that, and that's a concern. Because it still is not the house over there, we have that problem. So 4 houses coming there, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. Yeah, that's my concern about the plan. Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Any members of council have any questions? So your concerns are the height of the building and the size of the building on the parcel?
That's right. But my house, the way that my house is much, much lower, and is a bungalow. But house to next house, my neighbor, my house is like 2 floors to compare with his house. That's a bungalow, so if it's going 2 floors next to me, it looks like the 3 floor.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, any members of council have any questions? Councillor Noyes?
Thank you. One question in regards to parking on the street. When people park on the street now in the wintertime, do you call bylaw and put in a complaint? Because no one's allowed to park on the street.
We did a couple of times, but when we didn't see anything happen, so we just give it up. So we're just dealing with it.
Okay. I encourage you to keep calling.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in opposition to the application or to speak to council on this matter? Mr. Patton, is there anyone in the digital waiting room that has indicated they wish to speak to us?
Your Worship, there is nobody here.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, have we received any subsequent correspondence from anyone on this issue?
We did not, Mayor Redekop.
Then I'm going to declare this public meeting closed, and we're going to proceed to deal with the staff report. And Councillor Dubanow, I understand you have a resolution.
I do, Your Worship. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Flagg that Council approves the amendments to the Town Zoning Bylaw number 12990 as detailed in report number PDS 46-2023 for the lands known as 0-1215 Lavinia Street, and further that Council directs staff to submit the necessary bylaw.
Are there any questions or comments? Councillor Flagg, did you have a question about the building location?
I did, Your Worship. I would like to amend that to move the building back 6 meters or adjacent to 43 Lavinia Street. Looking at GeoMap, it appears as though there would be sufficient space there. It may align with the neighboring property, and I would certainly be okay if staff were enabled to make the decision that is the most logical in this case. But the ultimate goal is to get 2 cars in the parking lot with 1 car in the driveway.
So,
I'm sorry, 1 car in the 2 in the driveway, 1 in the two parking spaces, 1 in the garage. Thank you.
that won't alleviate the problem of potentially musical cars. Ms. Young, how would you suggest that we deal with this? This is a potential amendment that would require the house to be set back a further 6 meters. Any comments from you?
Through your worship to council. Yep, I do think that by moving the house back by 6 meters will provide for an additional parking space. So that might help with the public concern of street parking. But in terms of accessibility between the vehicles and movement between the vehicles, it will still continue to be tandem parking. We had discussed with Amy as well, Ms. Perel, that we could widen the driveway a little bit, so that way there will be a little more flexibility between the vehicles, and then hopefully that will help with the situation. But staff will continue to review this proposal, and we'll try our very best to find a better solution as well.
So I note that the required setback is 1.2 meters or interior side yard setback, 1.7 meters because it's 2 stories?
Yes, correct.
And this provides 1.9. There's a little bit of space. Councillor Flagg, I don't want to take over this. This is your issue, and I'm just wanting to make sure. This is a recommendation report. This isn't an information report. So if we make a decision tonight, then that's what the owner can rely upon. And if we're going to make changes, then I wonder whether it's maybe prudent to put this over to July the 10th for all of us to get out whatever our concerns are. July the 10th is 2 weeks from now, and still leaves you well within your 120-day time frame. So I'm thinking that might be more prudent. Councillor Flagg, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, with that said, maybe I will move to defer until the next.
So Councillor Dubanow has his hand up. How about if you hold that off for a minute? Councillor Dubanow.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Just touching on what Councillor Flagg had mentioned about the parking. You know, I'm a little weary about moving the house back just because of the interface of some of the neighboring properties there, and you know, being familiar with that area, the big backyards are one of the draws. So I wouldn't want to take that away. To have a bigger front yard that is you know, asphalt for parking. I'm wondering if there might be some opportunity, just looking at the renderings, it looked, just relative to the size of the garage doors, it looks like they're 1.5 car garage doors, which, you know, you can't fit 2 cars side by side on that. It just gives you a little more play when you go in and out of the garage. And I'm just wondering if there might be an opportunity, perhaps then, you wouldn't have, you'd still be stuck with the situation of a car in the garage. You'd have to pull the cars out of the driveway like anyone else, but maybe there's some opportunity to widen out the driveway. I hate the idea of taking up green space and, you know, planting areas on a property, but if council's concern is the available parking, I think it might be better to widen the driveway rather than lengthening it, just to, if it's possible, just to have not run into that situation of musical cars in the driveway. And believe me, I've been there. In my own home, two people who work, single car driveway, it is not fun, and we had the ability to communicate with each other easily. So I certainly understand council's concern with that. So that was just a thought, if we're going to put this over, maybe just something for staff to look into, Your Worship.
Okay. Any other members of council? I wonder if, Ms. Young, I wonder if you could clarify, so the elevation seemed to be a concern of the individual who spoke to us this evening. And how is the height calculated? Is it from the highest grade elevation on the lot, or is it from the street? How's that going to work?
Through your worship. So when it comes to elevation, when there's different levels of elevation on a subject property, we would be measuring the average of the front elevation. So we will be taking the lowest point and averaging it with the highest point at the front. So we would be considering that as a whole. And then, yeah.
At the front, because this property appears to be rising towards the rear.
Yes, so if the rear is higher and then the front is lower, we would still be taking the average of the highest point, and then averaging it with the lowest point. And then that's how we would calculate the front elevation.
For the whole lot, or for just the front of the property?
For the whole lot.
Okay, and then the other question that I had before we move to defer is the setback itself. How does 6 meters compare to the existing houses on Lavinia? Because it looks like the next door neighboring house is set back a bit more than 6 meters.
So through your worship, 6 meters is a little bit closer than the traditionally setback of the neighborhood in the area. However, it also, we do look at the property lines. We measure from the property lines. When we're looking at Geopedia, we are looking at it as a whole without the property lines there. So it might appear as if the driveways of the next door are longer and set back a little bit further. But in this case, the 6 meters is from the property line, which does take up a little bit of the front there.
Well, I would, from my perspective, I would think that you might want to look at how this new building, which is going to be denser than the single-family dwellings, how that's going to integrate with the neighborhood if the houses are set back further. Looks like the house next door could be, I don't know, maybe 10 meters anyways. So it may not, anyways, I'll leave that with you if this is going to be deferred. Can I go back to you, Councillor Flagg, to move to defer to July the 10th for further discussions between staff and the owner based on discussions we've had here today? And while you're doing that, would you also get some information about the site alteration?
For sure.
Thank you.
So moved. Thank you, Worship. I'll move to defer to July 10th. Thank you.
And seconded by Councillor Dubanow. Any questions with respect to the timing? All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much, Ms. Young.
Thank
now,
you.
don't go away, because I think you're up next, aren't you? Perfect. Okay, so we have another proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendment, and this is with respect to property on Pettit Road. It'll be the same routine. Ms. Young is going to be providing us with some background information, and we'll go through the same procedure as we did for this last public meeting. Ms. Young, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Your Worship. Okay. All right, so the purpose of this public meeting is to provide information and staff recommendation to council regarding the proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendment for the lands known as 1169 Pettit Road. The application was submitted by the agent, Susan Smythe from Cortec, Inc., on behalf of the property owner, Crystal Ridge Homes, and Jeff Davis. The applicant is requesting to amend the official plan to add a site-specific policy area designation to allow an increase in the maximum density permitted. The applicant is also requesting to rezone the subject property from residential 1 to a site-specific residential 3 zone to facilitate the construction of 2 semi-detached dwellings. A site-specific provision is proposed to allow a reduction in the minimum unit frontage. A recommendation is being presented to council the same evening as the public meeting due to low level of interest from residents in the area and due to the proposal being in compliance with the town's policies. The notification of today's public meeting was provided in accordance to the requirements of the Planning Act by placing a notice in the June 1st, 2023 edition of the Fort Erie Post newspaper. In addition, all property owners within 120 meters of the subject property were mailed a notice of complete application and public meeting on the same day. The timeline of this application is a completed application was deemed on April 19th of this year, followed by a public information open house on May 18th, and the statutory and public meeting and staff recommendation report is being presented to council today on June 26th, which is shown in red. If the application is approved by council, the next step will be the approval of the amending bylaw, followed by the 20-day appeal period, which will take place in July and August of this year. In accordance with Bill 109, a combined official plan and zoning bylaw amendment is subject to a 120-day processing and review timeline, which begins when town staff receives a completed application. So as of today, we are on day 69 out of the 120 days. The subject property is located in the Spears High Point neighborhood in the town of Fort Erie. The subject property is located on the west side of Pettit Road and south of Nathaniel Avenue. The property is approximately 1,788 meters squared and have about 37 meters of lot frontage. To the north, the land uses surrounding this property is single detached dwellings. To the south, it's more single detached dwellings and petrol gas station. To the east, there are single detached dwellings and then Spears Garden subdivision. And then to the west, more single detached dwellings a little further down, vacant lands, and then the High Points subdivision. The subject lands are located in the Spears High Point Secondary Plan and are designated low-density residential. The land use designation is reserved for single detached, semi-detached, and duplex dwellings and allows a maximum density of 16 units per hectare. The applicant is requesting an amendment to the official plan to add site-specific policy area designation to the subject lands. The site-specific policy area designation is to permit a maximum density of 22 units per hectare. Staff notes that the construction of 3 dwelling units will provide a density of 16 units per hectare, and the construction of 4 dwelling units will provide the density of 22 units per hectare. So as a result, a official plan amendment is required to allow the 1 additional dwelling unit on the subject property. The subject property is not identified within an area of archaeological potential in accordance with Schedule D, and it is not impacted by natural heritage features in accordance with Schedule C and C1 of the official plan. The subject property is located within a petroleum resource area in accordance with Schedule B. The town has policies requiring the 75-meter setback for the protection of these resources, including wells, and staff do note that the property is not located within 75 meters of an active well. Overall, the Spears High Points neighborhood is striving to create a comprehensive community to meet the demands of residents and visitors by providing a range of residential densities, commercial space, mixed-use areas, and open spaces as examples. The proposed use will introduce a gentle residential intensification in a low-density built area, contribute to the housing supply, and provide an alternative housing form to this area. The subject property is zoned residential 1 in accordance to the town of for Erie's comprehensive zoning bylaw. The permitted uses with this zone include single detached dwellings and uses accessory thereto. The applicant is proposing to rezone the subject property to residential 3, which permits semi-detached dwellings. As such, to facilitate the proposal, a zoning bylaw amendment is required to permit semi-detached dwellings on the property and to designate a site-specific provision for a reduced lot frontage for each unit. And then here is an image of the site plan. In the circle, red circles here, is the requested site-specific provision. The applicant is proposing to reduce the unit frontage for interior lots from 9.5 meters to 8.58 meters. The future corner lot will meet the R3 zoning requirements by providing 11.5 meters of unit frontage. So this chart here indicates the standard R3 zone regulations and the proposed measurements to facilitate this proposal. I note that the proposal meets majority of the R3 zoning regulations for the semi-detached dwellings, except for the minimum unit frontage for the interior lots. Staff can support this reduction as the subject property is sufficiently sized to accommodate appropriately sized semi-detached dwellings. It does provide on-site parking and adequate space to access the rear yards. The requested reduction will have minimal impact on the surrounding properties. All right. So here are some images from a site visit. We have the front view from Pettit Road, and then we have a side view standing from Nathaniel Drive. A public information open house was held by town staff and the applicant in the atrium of Town Hall on May 18th of 2023. There were 6 members of the public who attended this meeting, and staff did not receive any written concerns or comments. In summary of the concerns, the members of the public had concerns regarding drainage flow to the existing roadside ditches. The applicant did submit a site servicing plan, and town staff do not have objections to the proposed official plan amendments and zoning bylaw amendments after the review of the site servicing plan. The owner will also be providing a master lot grading and drainage plan prepared by a qualified engineer for this property as a condition of approval of the future consent application after the approval of the zoning bylaw amendment. Town staff will further assess the proposed grading plans to ensure drainage is properly allocated and will not negatively affect abutting properties prior to the finalization of this consent application. Members of the public were also concerned of the density increase and that 4 units will not be suitable for the property and the area. As mentioned earlier in this presentation, the proposed density increase would equate to 1 additional dwelling unit. In staff's opinion, this increase is minor and will have minimal impact on the surrounding land uses. The proposed semi-detached dwellings will be similar to the surrounding single detached dwellings from a height and appearance perspective. Just as a quick summary of that. Residents in the area had concerns that the proposal will have an impact on pedestrian safety due to the increase of vehicles on Pettit Road as well. Pettit Road is a classified collector road in the town's official plan. A collector road is designed to carry larger volumes of traffic and function as a link between arterial roads or highway roads and local roads. Staff notes that the owner is required to provide a cash contribution for the construction of sidewalks along Nathaniel Avenue and Pettit Road frontages as part of their future consent application. So this will also assist with the public's concern for pedestrian safety. Lastly, residents in the area were concerned about the potential impact of the proposed development on their property value. However, staff note that the potential increase in property tax is not within the planning scope for commenting, unfortunately. In conclusion, planning staff are of the opinion that the proposed combined official plan and zoning bylaw amendment application would make better use of an underutilized parcel within the urban boundary and will contribute to the diversification of housing supply of the established neighborhood. The proposal will provide an appropriately sized dwelling, on-site parking, sufficient amenity space, and maximize the utilization of municipal infrastructure. It is consistent with provincial, regional, and town's local policies and aligns with the vision of the Spears High Point Secondary Plan. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Young. Do any members of council have any questions? Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Mayor, through Ms. Young. Again, thank you very much for a really good presentation. I guess we're on driveways today, at least I am, I guess. When I'm looking at the what you call it, the administrative report, the appendix 2, where it has the outline of the lot outline and things. Now, does that go, okay, when I'm seeing the gray area and I'm seeing 12.65, does that go to the property line or does that go to the road?
Through your worship to Councillor Noyes, yes, it will be going to the property line.
Okay, thank you.
Any other members of council? Just in terms of the proposal and the trees, looking at the overhead, it looks like there's a series of trees that are on municipal property on the road allowance. Those trees can't be touched by the developer, correct, without the municipal authority?
Yes, that's correct.
And the trees that are on the site now, some of them will have to be removed, I would presume, in order for there to be buildings put up. Is there some type of tree plan regarding the landscaping that the town would require the developer to enter into?
Through your worship, so through the consent application, we can set a condition of consent for a tree preservation plan to ensure that any trees within municipal lands would be protected during the construction, and if there are any removals, then it will be, permission must be provided. Sorry, permission will be requested to municipal staff.
Right. And the only other question that I have is we're going from one driveway to 4 driveways. This is a busy road. The most frequent complaint I received going door to door was the speed of the traffic on this road. So any comments about that?
Through your worship, Pettit Road, I will kind of reiterate that it is a collector's road, so it is designed to carry more larger volumes of traffic along this road, and because it's a collector road, it's proposed to have sidewalks along both sides, but through this development application, we will be implementing sidewalk construction along Pettit Road for the frontage of this subject property, which will help in the future of pedestrian safety, and it'll also help regulate some of the traffic flow there.
Do you have any idea when that road might be reconstructed to a full urban standard, including sidewalks?
Through your worship, at this time, I do not know.
Okay, I can ask that when we get to the report. Thank you. There are no other members of council, then thank you very much. We'll go now to the agent on behalf of the applicant. Ms. Smythe. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So I'll just start. Good evening, Mayor, members of council, and those attending the meeting this evening. I'm here, Susan Smythe, Senior Planner with Cortec Group. I'm here on behalf of the owner applicant, Mr. Jeff Davis. He has the Crystal Ridge Homes Company. He's also a local resident of Fort Erie. I will quickly provide a synopsis of the project and the requested amendments because Samantha did a very good job providing some details. So I'll quickly run through the presentation slides that I prepared. So just quickly, again, the site is located on the west side of Pettit, south of Nathaniel, and north of Garrison Road. The land area for development is approximately 1,791 square meters, or 0.179 hectares in size. That is with the removal of the daylight triangle at the corner of Nathaniel and Pettit, and that daylight will be dedicated at that intersection to the town, and that's essentially for the protection of the sight lines through that intersection. The site frontage along Pettit is approximately 37.24 meters, which would be distributed amongst the interior proposed lots as noted by Samantha, where there would be the requested reduction from 9.5 meters to the 8.5. And the lot that's on the corner, the exterior lot, will meet that minimum requirement for an exterior lot frontage. As noted, the proposed density for the 4 units is calculated to be 22 units per net hectare, which is slightly over the maximum 16 under the Spear High Point Secondary Plan. This calculation is used to quantify and determine how new development is in the town and how it can get to the density targets which is set by both the province and the region. The increase is not expected to create any negative land use conflicts because the dwelling type being proposed for semi-detached are permitted in the low-density residential designation of this plan. And the introduction of this dwelling type can contribute to the use of the services within the area. The surrounding area, as noted previously, can be described by low density with a mix of single to 2-story types dwelling houses. And further to the west along Nathaniel and newer subdivisions, there is the introduction of newer medium type density of housing. The town and the region policy document supports the infill residential lots on lands that are underutilized within the built-up areas, and also that has access to municipal services. Here again, there is some pictures of the site visit, as noted along the one side, primarily Nathaniel. Yes, there is a row of trees that is on the town's boulevard, and that will not be removed as part of this development. As noted by Mr. Mayor, the indication of scattered trees on the interior of the site. The development has been strategically positioned whereby the removal of the mature trees, but you're going to try to keep that to a minimum, and a tree preservation plan will be prepared. Next slide, please. So this slide, oh, sorry. I have the my apologies, thank you. So essentially this is just to kind of delineate, I think you've seen the proposed conceptual site plan, but also this survey sketch, so the proposed survey sketch, whereby it goes from 1 part into 4 parts for the delineation of the lots. This is for the creation, as noted, 2 semi-detached lots or the 4 units, all having separate driveways and garages. As noted, the driveway lengths are longer, so they could provide the accommodation of tandem parking on the driveway as well as an additional space in the garage. As noted, the amendment here is the special policy designation for an increase in density to 22 units per hectare. And secondly, it's the zoning bylaw amendment change from residential R1 zone to the residential R3 zone to permit the semi-detached dwelling units, as well as the reduced lot frontage from 9.5 meters to 8.5 meters for the 3 interior lots. And just here to my right, the chart is just showing that all other zoning provisions are being met. As noted with the reduction by Samantha, we believe that it will not negatively affect the functionality and or the appearance of the units because we've tried to maintain the side yard setbacks, either meeting them or exceeding them, particularly to the rear yard setbacks. So having a deeper rear lot, protecting and offering some sensitivity to the adjacent properties for the private amenity spaces. So to support these applications, technical studies were identified at the pre-consultation meeting to assist both the town and the region in the review of the proposal against policies and criteria for an appropriate infill development. One being the planning justification and impact analysis, and the other was the preliminary stormwater management and functional servicing report. As noted, the legal separation of these lots will be subject to the consent applications pending the approvals of the amendments to both the official plan and zoning. Next slide will be me. Why do I keep doing that? Which one?
Just right click.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So this slide just essentially provides a general rendering and the arrangement and type of the units being proposed. Originally, the thought was to have a more modern flat roof design. However, since that time, the owner has decided to change that type of look and feel. And so therefore, the proposed unit types will be a low sloped roof pitch. And the building materials will be complementary using stone brick and the other type of materials as noted in the adjacency, the housing types to this site. The building height, to reiterate, will be meeting the zoning provision, so it will not exceed the building height. These details will be further refined during the time of the consent applications with the floor plans, elevations, and the lot grading plans. I don't know why it's not working for me. I keep pressing that button. Okay. For every new development proposal, it shall be weighted against current legislation and to be consistent and conform to provincial, regional, and local policies. Having regard for provincial policy statement in the growth plan, settlement areas are to accommodate a significant supply and range of housing options through intensification and redevelopment of this proposal, which is being provided this evening. Furthermore, the regional official plan provides more focus on the land that is available to be developed at higher densities on a compact built form, offering different housing choices for changing lifestyles. And with regards to the town official plan, more specifically the Spears High Point secondary plan, it provides policies to encourage the optimization of available land for infill opportunities to complement the area in terms of assisting the vibrancy of surrounding services such as schools and local shops. The proposed development does conform and is consistent to the provincial, regional, and local policies, since the site plan promotes an opportunity for intensification and redevelopment where it can be accommodated by municipal services and help the region and the town address housing shortages. As noted, an open house meeting was held on May 18th, and here are some of the comments that were provided by those in attendance: traffic and safety for pedestrians with no sidewalks. As noted at the pre-consultation, both the town and region did not express any concerns for the increased traffic because the additional units would not significantly impact the traffic flow. That being approximately 8 vehicles, so let's say 2 vehicles per unit, that would be generated, and it's localized to the neighborhood, which can be accommodated, that traffic flow and pattern on Pettit Road. So therefore, no traffic study was required. In terms of concerns for pedestrian safety, it is very important. And as noted, there could be the potential for development charges to be generated by this project and or any other developments to implement improvements such as sidewalks. As noted by Samantha, she just indicated that as part of a condition of consent, there would be a request or a requirement to provide sidewalks along Pettit and along Nathaniel for the stretch of this site. So that is something that is welcoming. In terms of drainage issues, so that being the impervious areas that are being added, so the added driveways, building footprints. This will be captured through buried chambers and such that the drainage outlet will not be directly discharged to the existing ditches. The engineering department will review and will provide approval of the detailed design of the site servicing at the time of the consent application. In terms of compatibility with the existing houses in the area, the height, massing, and scale of the development is believed to be complementary with the single detached units along Pettit, and consistent with the direction of the town to integrate a higher density and alternative housing choice to residences within the area of the town. In terms of tree removal, as noted earlier, it was the building footprints were strategically positioned to minimize those impacts. Landscaping, fencing, and buffering between the adjacent properties to protect the private amenity spaces will be provided. This here slide just generally shows the anticipated next steps in the process, with our team addressing any outstanding questions or comments by members of public and or council, followed by the town planning staff preparing the recommendation and the anticipated approval of the bylaws. Following the 20-day appeal period, it will be the application for consent. And then following that will be the requirement for the owner applicant to clear all those conditions and get the final approvals by the town or any other approval authorities before any building permits can be obtained for construction. And this completes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Smythe. Do any members of council have any questions? Councillor Flagg.
Thank you, Worship. Through you, I'm not sure whether this may go to Ms. Young or Mr. Herlowick, but was there any consideration to having the driveways off of Nathaniel as opposed to off of Pettit?
Through to you, Mr. Worship. Yes, at the time of pre-consultation, to be quite honest, we were retained after that point. There was an original proposal, which was a 4-unit townhouse facing Nathaniel. And so the concern at that time was it was a little too intense and that there was the ease of access to municipal service was easier along Pettit than it was Nathaniel. So then the decision was, instead of the townhouse, to flip it to allow for semi-detached facing Pettit with the accessibility of connecting to services.
Councillor Flagg.
I think that answers things, Your Worship.
Any other members of council? So, Ms. Smythe, looking at the Appendix 2, which is the kind of the site location of the building and the driveways, you had a slide here. I don't know if you can go back to it.
I will try. This one?
That's it.
Yes.
So the shaded area shows a setback of 12.65 meters, and the northerly unit, because its frontage is affected by the daylight triangle, shows 7 meters back to, I guess, the building. And there's a 3-foot portion of the building that goes out towards the road beyond where the garage starts.
Yes. Yes, through you, Mr. Worship. Yes, so, yes, so the driveway is got a longer depth to the front. So it leads, so the garage is set back further. The house is closer to the street face, yet it still meets the required setback from the front yard.
So the zoning that's being requested provides only a 7-meter setback to the dwelling, 12.65 to the garage. That really only applies to the one unit, because the other units would have more than 7 feet. They would have 12.65 minus 3, which would be 9.65.
Through you, Mr. Worship, that is correct. So yeah, so we just essentially showed the, we can definitely put the dimensions for the interior lots, yes.
I think that should be included.
Yes.
Just to make sure that it's clear that those setbacks are actually deeper than 7 meters, except for the one. And even with the one parcel, if it weren't for the daylight triangle, it would be 9.65 meters back from the road.
That is correct.
Yeah, I think that that's something that would be advisable. Any other members of council? If not, then thank you very much, Ms. Smythe.
Thank you.
We're going to go now to the portion of the meeting where anyone other than the owner or the owner's agent who wishes to speak in favor of the application may come forward. Mr. Patton, is there appear to be anyone in the digital waiting room that might want to address council?
There's nobody in the waiting room, Your Worship.
Is that an empty room?
Empty the whole time.
Must be lonely. Okay, so then there's no one that wishes to speak in favor other than the applicant. Anyone who wishes to address council or speak in opposition to this application? I see fingers being pointed, so there's obviously some interest. Please come forward. And could we have your name and address for the record, please?
Sure. It's Talia Reeves, and my address is 1178 Pettit Road. So I'm right across from the Nathaniel.
Please proceed.
So I've lived on Pettit Road all my life, grew up on Pettit Road down the hill. And I used to have to walk up all the way to actually Highway 3 to catch my bus. And at the time, I never was afraid of traffic and followed the rules of the road, respected the rules of the road. And I would say people who drive respected the rules of the road at the time as well. I've lived at my dwelling, we've lived at our dwelling now for 14 years, and I'll tell you, the traffic is not the same. Recently, in the last 2 years, there is the subdivision that has been built by Green Acres, and the traffic has increased immensely to the point where I don't feel safe walking down Pettit Road. I respect Pettit Road because I understand it is a flow traffic getting people through. The new residents into that subdivision don't understand or respect the road, and the traffic is not safe. They've also put a bus stop at the corner of Nathaniel and Pettit. I have children who play on my driveway, waiting for the bus, and I fear their safety. And I understand that we need to develop Fort Erie and we need to increase homes, but adding this many homes in that small little area just adds to my fear of the safety of the traffic. I also want to bring to the attention of I can't even get out of my own driveway anymore because of the increased traffic. Not even just because of the subdivision in front of me, but the traffic flow that's coming up and down Pettit. And it's not even the traffic flow, but it's the speed of the traffic. It is 50, it's a posted 50 there, and people are flying down the road at 70, 80, even 90. We do have, at times, cops will stop, will be monitoring traffic, but unfortunately, their resources are slim and can't be monitoring traffic flow. So this traffic concern is a very, very serious concern. I also want to bring the attention that all the new residents in that new subdivision, again, don't respect walking down Pettit Road. There's young children on tricycles and bicycles trying to walk down Pettit Road. The fear is their safety. I understand that this is the first I'm hearing about sidewalks. No time is sooner to get the flow of traffic, to get pedestrian safety on board. We do have water issues, drainage issues on Pettit. These are all things that have been addressed, but the biggest number one concern is traffic. Something needs to be done to either slow it down or to minimize it, or something to protect the safety of the children that go up and down that street, and for me to get out of my driveway. I can't, with the congestion of turning into the new subdivision, I can't turn in, sometimes I can't turn out, and now I'm gonna have two additional, and I even conflict with the current residents on Pettit Road, the dwelling that's there, I conflict with them at times, as they're trying to fight for the traffic, get out in and out of the traffic coming out of Nathaniel. So this is a big concern.
Thank you very much, Ms. Reese. Those are indeed great concerns, and I'll have some questions, or maybe other members of council will have some questions of staff with respect to the timing of road reconstruction, installation of sidewalks, what we can do about speed control and traffic calming. In any event, thank you very much. Any other members of council have any questions of Ms. Reese? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to address council? That was a silent clap. I didn't hear it. Anyone else wish to address council? Mr. Patton, still no one in the digital waiting room?
Still up to your worship.
Madam Clerk, any new correspondence since the report was published?
No further comments, Mayor Redekop.
Thank you. Then I'm going to declare this public meeting closed, and that's going to take us then to the report. And Councillor Christensen, I understand you have the resolution to put this on the floor.
By myself, seconded by Councillor Lewis, that council approves the amendments to the town's official plan and zoning bylaw number 12990 as detailed in report number PDS 47-2023 for the lands known as 1169 Pettit Road, and further that council directs staff to submit the necessary bylaws.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. It's in regards to the speed on Pettit Road, and I agree with the delegate here that it is a concern, and I know that you had kind of mentioned about when this will be brought up to urban standards and perhaps sidewalks. From what I understand from the report, we're not actually planning on putting in sidewalks until the road's upgraded. So do we have any idea if it's even on the on our future plans in the next 10 years?
Mr. Walsh, what is the status, if this is on at all?
Mayor, I looked through the 10-year budget. It's not in the 10-year plan, but I know it is in the ultimate development charges study, and we are looking at timing right now.
So I think that we've heard from one of the residents, that's a pretty typical refrain. Not only is the development to the west ongoing, there's a development to the east behind Ms. Reese's home that is going to be coming online. There is assembly of land to the north of the current development behind Pettit Road to the west. So I do think that you may want to be looking at the timing of this, because it's not a safe street for pedestrians, sure. So perhaps you can take that to the Infrastructure Services Committee and consider what might be done on that. Councillor Noyes, anything further?
Yes, I just wanted to comment that we are looking at traffic calming in different areas of town, and perhaps this road should be put on the list to be looked at, because there may be some measures, because if the speed limit is only 50 kilometers, there's a number of things that can be done, and perhaps it needs to be investigated for any traffic calming that may help.
And Councillor Noyes, I will note that you are the chair of Infrastructure Services, and these are within that committee's jurisdiction, so perhaps you can take a look at that during your next meeting, or
Yes.
raise the issue.
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Dubanow.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Just touching on what Councillor Noyes had mentioned, I'm just wondering if Pettit Road had been looked at, and if we had any data when we did our initial round of traffic calming studies, where we made the initial determinations on what roads needed immediate attention. I'm just wondering if maybe staff had a comment, if it was looked into at that time.
Yeah, Mr. Walsh, would you be able to comment on that now?
Yes, we did not look at it. It has not been on the radar at all.
So this particular road is also the Niagara Regional Transit route in and out of Fort Erie to the highway and back. So that's just one added item. So that's something I guess that we could follow up on. Councillor Dubanow, anything further?
No, Your Worship, that was it. Thank you.
Any other members of council? So, Ms. Young, with respect to the frontage, the chart in the report makes reference to 7 meters, 12.65 meters to the garage. The interior lots are actually more like 9.65 meters. Can we amend the site-specific zoning to provide for that for the 3 interior lots? Or 3, I guess it's not 3 interior lots, but it's 3 interior units.
Through your worship, Could you please
There are
repeat?
4 units.
Yes.
The northerly unit has a 7-meter setback because of the daylight triangle.
Yes.
The actual setbacks for the other 3 units to the south to the building itself is 12.65 meters less 3 meters, which is where the house juts out, which is 9.65 meters. Can we not specify that as the setback for those interior lots?
Yes.
So you'd need an amendment to do that.
Through your worship,
Mr. Hurlovich?
Yes, Your Worship. So if that's council's desire to have the staff include that as the requirement, the 9.65, I think it was, we could incorporate that into the amending bylaw.
Okay, so do you need anything formally done here tonight?
I think we have council's direction. That's sufficient.
Because this is a recommendation report.
Correct.
This is adopted. Okay. Any other members of council on this? Okay, I'm going to call the vote then. All those in favor of the recommendation? Opposed? That is carried. Okay, we're going to take, it's 8:42, we're going to take we're going to take an 8-minute break. We're going to come back at 8:50 and hopefully conclude our business. to work. And we are now at the consent agenda. Are there any items that anyone wishes removed from the consent agenda? If not, then Councillor Flagg, you have the resolution for the items in the consent agenda.
I do, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Dubanow, that council approves the consent agenda as recommended.
Any questions or comments? Councillor Noyes.
Thank you. In regards to, under boards and committees, the Community Gaming Development Corporation, I was happy to hear that the revenue has increased substantially. I'm just wondering if we could get a report at some point on why, oh, you're not the councillor anymore. You were for a long time. Who's the councillor? George.
Well, we're having our AGM. We're having our AGM next week. So after that, I will make sure we can give you a report on an update on that.
Yeah, it's very good news that that there's more money available to the charities and non-for-profits. I'm very happy to hear that. I was just curious how much, because it was more than what was anticipated. So, as per the report,
I'll make sure you get that.
Okay. The other one is under reports. I think that's still consent agenda. The PDS 49-2023, housekeeping amendments. I don't know if I can find it on here. Basically, it had to do with the swales.
That's reports. That's reports.
That's reports. Okay, it's not, okay, forget that. That's all then.
Any other members of council? So, I've got on PDS 50, Mr. Hurlovich, that's the report that deals with Alliston Woods, and I just wondered, Appendix 2 of that report, which shows the subdivision, makes reference to block 183, which is in the northeast corner, which I think is a wooded area. And you may not have the answer tonight, and that's fine. Just wondering if that has been conveyed to the municipality or not, which is probably the land dedication part.
Yeah, Your Worship, I see the block on the appendix. I do not have the answer, but I will get it to, to council.
Great, thank you very much. And where in this, if you would know, maybe, and again, I'm sorry that I didn't take this up with you, do you know where the stormwater management pond for this development is located?
I do not know where that is. I actually thought
you can provide
it may be
yeah, sorry about this.
Underground tanks, but I'll double check.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments? If not, all those in favor of the recommendations in the consent agenda, that is carried. That then takes us to reports. And, sorry. The first report is PDS 48. Councillor Dubanow, do you have the resolution? Oh, yeah, sorry. No, yeah.
No, thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Flagg that council approves the amendments to the amendments to the town zoning bylaw number 12990 as detailed in report number PDS 48-2023 for the lands known as 272 Ridge Road South, and further that council approves a Canadiana draft plan of vacant land condominium dated May 13th, 2022, showing 3 blocks for a total of 18 block townhouse dwellings as Appendix 2 of Appendix 2 of Report Number PDS 48-2023 in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act, RSO 1990 CP 13, and the regulations thereunder, subject to the conditions contained in Appendix 3 of Report Number PDS 48-2023, and further, that council directs staff to circulate the conditions of draft approval in Appendix 3 of Report Number PDS 48-2023 to the applicable agencies in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act, and further, that council directs staff to submit the necessary bylaws.
Any questions or comments? Councillor Flagg and then Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, Appendix 3 on page 2, note 11 says that the owner-developer agrees the executed condominium plans for meeting condition 10 as noted above, but there is no condition 10 that I can see.
There is no condition 10. So I wonder if we could get some clarification on that. Yeah, please come forward, Mr. Vanderveen. That's a typo, I'm presuming.
Yes, good evening, Mayor Redekop, council, any members of the public in attendance or on Zoom. Yeah, that would just be a typographical error. The auto formatting must have skipped a number.
So is the reference then to be to paragraph 9?
Yes, that's correct.
Councillor Flagg, back to you.
That's all. Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, Councillor Noyes.
Well, thank you, Mayor. There's two things I wanted to bring people's attention to. The planting strips being one. It's on page 10 of 18, and it's under planting strips, and it's talking about may support reduced planting strips with may be enhanced through the use, and I don't think there should be a may, and that should be enhanced, as opposed to leaving it as an option.
Okay, so you're on planting strips on page 10 and the far right column?
Yes, just may be enhanced, but I think we should be a little bit more definite there, because I know there's some issues about that to start with.
So, Mr. Vanderveen, is that may be or will be?
Yeah, I would say will. We do have a condition that says a landscape plan needs to be submitted to the satisfaction of town staff. So we could certainly require that through that condition.
Thank you. And there was one other thing on page 7 of 18. We're at section 4.22.9.10 of the secondary plan, and I guess it doesn't just apply to this particular thing, but it's in this report. So I wanted to bring attention to it, that it does talk about stacked townhouses being allowed, and I don't think we want that in our secondary plans. That's an approved use.
Any comment on that, Mr. Vanderveen?
What I would say is the secondary plan is under appeal, so it's not yet in force and effect. We could follow up on that to see if, this development is not a stacked townhouse development, just to point that out, but we can look into that policy further.
Yeah, thank you. I did have a chance to talk to Mr. Hurlovich about that, and he basically also said that it's something that they'll be looking at in the secondary plan, and that I think the council has made their position on stacked townhouses pretty clear, so that probably won't be, but I wanted to mention it because it's showing up in this report. That's all. Thank you.
Any other members of council? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a couple of comments, I guess, and might lead to a couple of questions. With respect to this development, I was a little caught off guard for it being in the council package, given that it was not part of the business services update on May 29th. So I had actually communicated with some members of the public that it wasn't coming forward, and then when it was in the agenda, I made some phone calls quite quickly to area residents who were concerned. I want to start by saying the residents, or the majority of the residents that I've spoke to in the neighborhood, there are some that would prefer to see no development happen on this property, and I've made it very clear that I do see it as a piece of property that is a good one for development in terms of its location, service running around the area, and a good use of infilling. When I go through all of the responses from the residents that have come in to date since the first public meeting to this report, The issue that seems to be the most alarming is the height and the lack of it being able to fit in with the area and the neighborhood. And page 5 of the report, section A, says the height, bulk, and arrangement of the buildings and structure to achieve a harmonious design, compatible integration with the surrounding area, and not negatively impacting the lower density residential uses. I have a bit of concern. It goes on in the explanation to talk about while the built form is fairly unique to the area, and I think unique's a rather unique way of describing it, does not necessarily mean the same as. And there is similar block townhouse developments to the south of the subject property. And the property that they're referring to, for those who might not know the area well, is the single-story, 1 floor plus basement townhouse development to the south. So I don't know if I necessarily agree with the report where it compares the two different proposals, and I just wanted to make that as one comment. But I'm very disappointed that there's been no changes or modifications to the proposal since the first public meeting. We've had a huge amount of success with planning in dealing with, I'll use the Cherry Hill Road application as one, where we worked with the developer to bring down the height of the homes to fit in with the neighborhood. It appears to be very clear that this developer has no intention of working with the town of Fort Erie, and I think that's quite sad on their part, but also sad for the greater community, because we do have a housing shortage. These lots would certainly help with that, although not being affordable houses, it's still housing stock that we don't have. But I'm a bit disappointed that we were not able to move the needle with the developer in terms of trying to make this fit better with the neighborhood. So those are my comments. I do have one question, and that is with respect to the basement units, or the basement or the main level, because there is no basement, so I should correct myself. Is there any intent of having main floor apartments or rental spaces on this development that you're aware of?
Mr. Vanderveen?
Through Mayor Redekop to Councillor Lewis, not that we are aware of at this time. The developer hasn't indicated that that is their intent.
Okay, and thank you for the clarity on that. I am aware that in other municipalities and more urban municipalities, some developers move forward with a condo application into the municipality, and then after they've received their condo development application, they make an amendment to the condominium setup, and then later put in a main floor rental unit. Are there any comments on how we can put language in this to ensure that that doesn't happen?
Mr. Vanderveen?
Through Mayor Redekop to Councillor Lewis, that would be tough, only because of the recent changes to the Planning Act. And actually, our next report kind of goes into that a little bit further, but provision of additional units, up to 3 units, are permitted on any parcel in the urban boundary. And the Planning Act changes also included language that basically said any zoning or official plan policies or regulations that refute these as of right units basically are null and void, of no force and effect. So I don't think we can say impose zoning to restrict that. However, the Planning Act does say if any additional units are added, each unit needs to have at least 1 parking spot. And this current proposal basically only has 1 parking spot per unit on each parcel, in addition to visitor parking. So I think the restriction that would limit additional units in this case would be that each parcel has its own driveway. There wouldn't be space for an additional parking spot.
Perfect, and thank you for that clarity. And the reason I bring that up is in the report, we compare this proposal to the proposal to the south, which is what I'm going to call bungalow towns. The bungalow town development, I'm not sure the exact number of parking spaces, but there certainly appears to be much more parking in that proposal that was approved years ago than what's in the current proposal. So I'm a bit cautious in terms of where this may go, having learned what is happening in some of the, especially Peel Region municipalities with some of the townhouses and ground floor apartments. I'm going to yield some of my comments so we can hear more from the rest of council, but I would like to make sure that in this report, we do include that this subdivision, if it moves forward, does not have the ability to rent short-term rentals. I do not think it's a subdivision that speaks favorably to those. I think we're going to have parking issues to begin with, and I think we have enough historic areas, even though we debate where some of those may be, that will provide the ample space for that needed accommodation. The other is going back to the height requirement on this. It's funny how we talk 3 stories, but when I count and I look at the rooftop space as well, I mean, it almost sounds like 4-story units, which I know I would certainly be concerned about those. Councillor Flagg, when speaking with him earlier today, made a good suggestion of, is there a way to have the upper unit porches facing the fronts of the building, which would be the parking areas and the amenity space, for lack of better words, as opposed to the properties that abut the new development. And I think that would be something to consider. But again, we're working with a developer here that I don't think really cares, for lack of better words. But I would also like to have a conversation with council tonight to see if there is the ability to remove the rooftop patios from this proposal. I think there are spots where a rooftop patio may work. I don't see it in this location, and I really don't see this meeting the intent of the neighborhood plan number 1 that I was certainly involved in, or part of neighborhood plan number 2, which is under appeal. But I would like to see those 2 modifications made. So I'll yield my time on that, and we can certainly come back to it. But from speaking with the neighborhood, the real issue here is the height. There are some that say instead of the 18, it would be nicer to see 13, but the common theme amongst all of the concerns are the height and the towering effect that it's going to have on some of the much more lower density and much what I would call bungalows or 2-story town units. And then lastly, we had an email tonight that came in that compared this proposal to a business on Erie Road where there are 3 stories plus a rooftop patio. I quite like the proposal in the business core. I think it looks quite sharp. But I think if someone drives by that and looks at it and thinks, if that was next to my home, what would your thoughts be? I think it'd be fair to say most people would be concerned with having that towering effect. So I don't know if there's a way to, if we didn't go forward with removing the rooftop patios, find a way to position them in a way where they're facing down on the parking area, or parquet as they call it. But I would prefer to see those completely removed from this application. So those are my comments for now, and turn it back to you.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Any other members of council? Councillor McDermott.
I pretty much agree with Councillor Lewis's overview of the situation. Plus that L-shaped type of buffer out there where there's seems to be a lot of trees around that back area that would be fine. The rooftops would be fine if those trees were going to be there forever. But at one point, I think there's room there for at least a single-family home, or maybe 2. I'm not sure, but that buffer might not be there for the people that live behind the trees. So I worry about the fact that that buffer's not there, because I think if it was just a height issue, we might have mitigated that through the trees, but I don't believe those trees will be there forever. But I do agree with most all of Councillor Lewis's comments. I did get an opportunity to go out there and visit the site with him on a Sunday, and I tend to believe the same way he does on this.
Anyone else? I've got a few questions, Mr. I'm sorry, go ahead, Councillor Dubanow.
No, thank you, Worship. I'm just going to make a brief comment. I appreciate where Councillor Lewis is going with that. I personally would be in favor of trying to reposition the patios, putting up some screening, doing something like that to improve privacy. I would not be in favor of eliminating them entirely. And the reason being is I'd be concerned about the precedent we'd be setting, because often we at council, we talk about amenity space and we talk about the need to have the ability to enjoy time outdoors and outside. And this is actually a pretty innovative and creative way to utilize what would normally be dead space, unutilized space on a building, finding a way to make it work. Certainly I understand the concerns that the neighbors have with, looking down and other things, but I also understand that I've got residents who live on Sims Avenue who are going to have a 6-story apartment building in their backyard. And this is a reality we face in our community anytime there's a vacant property. And oftentimes, we hear individuals, everyone is in favor of development and intensification until it happens in their backyard. And I know I've got a vacant parcel behind my own house. I'm sure if something happens, I will have concerns just like everyone else. No one in this community is immune from it. And just the same, no one in this community is, in a position to, talk about why others should have development, but not them. So I understand the concern. I try my best to try and minimize that. But when I look at it from the wider perspective of the town, that this is something that's happening everywhere. And, as we have more apartments go up, as we have taller buildings go up, this is going to continue to be a challenge. And we have to find ways to make it work. I would be open to having screening, directional changes, anything of that sort. I would be very, very willing to support. But I really wouldn't want to eliminate such an innovative way to create outdoor amenity space. In fact, I would like to see more green roofs, more terrace roofs and other things like that in various areas of town where it makes sense. So I'm just mentioning that here. I'd be willing to support moving things around, but I will not support eliminating it entirely. That just kind of goes against my vision of innovative buildings. So that's just my comment, Your Worship.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Van der Veen, so regarding the height, I know that the review of what are called the base regulations against the proposed regulations suggests that the height is actually permitted, and the proposed height is actually less than what would be permitted. What is the base regulation for this parcel?
Like the existing zoning?
Is that what the base regulation is?
The base regulation would be the zone without any special provisions. So when, like in the case of this application, they're proposing a site-specific RM1, so the base provisions would be the height regulations permitted under just the standard RM1 zone.
But the actual current zoning is what?
The current zoning is R1 zone.
So wouldn't it be more helpful for us if we knew what the current zoning is, what the base regulation for the proposed zoning is, and then what the proposed changes? Then we'd have a bit better understanding of the whole width here. Because the chart that we have doesn't really provide that information. So we know that it's an existing lot of record, which is why you've indicated in your report that you would support a reduction of the minimum lot frontage from 50 meters to 28.33. I don't know what the lot frontage is for a R1. It's certainly not 50 meters. As an example. But that's, so in the future, perhaps, Mr. Hurlovich, we could provide that clarity.
I could clarify that now if you like.
Sure.
The height, for sure. So under the current R1 zoning, the max height regulations are 2.5 stories and 9 meters. The base height regulations under RM1 are 3 stories and 12 meters. And this proposal would be 3 stories in height. And the height from grade along the front elevation of the buildings to the roof is 8.43 meters. When you add on the parapet, which is about 1.2 meters, the total height is 9.65 meters.
Right. So that's higher than the current R1 zoning, and it's one more story than the R1 zoning. And the patios on the top of a building, how are they factored in, or are they factored in at all? They're obviously not a story. How does planning staff deal with those in terms of structure?
Yeah, from a current zoning perspective, it's not considered a story. It would just be the rooftop area. I think as Councillor Dubanow mentioned, we haven't had a lot of development that takes advantage of rooftop area, but it's not considered a discrete story. It would just be the roof. In this case, a flat roof.
Yeah, I would think that it's something that we need to consider when we're doing our official plan update and whatever zoning changes may be, because I don't think most people are contemplating their neighbors are going to be sitting on their roof looking over, which gets me to my next question. In the report, there's a suggestion that landscaping and fencing will somehow minimize any impacts that the height of this building and the rooftop patio might have on privacy of the neighbors. How does that, what kind of fencing and what kind of landscaping is going to accomplish that?
So I would say that would be twofold. So sort of on the ground level, there would be standard board-on-board fencing, use of vegetation such as trees to try and screen the development from adjacent properties. They could also implement measures on the rooftop patio to have like an opaque kind of, wall, if you will. So you can't actually peer into people's backyards depending on the placement of such screening devices, if you want to call them that.
We would have to impose that, would we not?
Sorry?
In terms of the rooftop patio, wouldn't we have to impose that as part of this report?
Yeah, I think that could be added as a condition.
Okay, so that's something then that, Councillor Lewis, you can bear in mind. The fence itself isn't going to accomplish any privacy other than up to 8 feet, I think is what our fences are. The other items here, so the privacy area, which is 4.5 meters adjacent to each unit, what does that mean?
That's basically the backyard amenity space required under the zoning bylaw for townhouse developments, block townhouse developments.
And under an R1, it would be what?
It would just be your standard rear yard setback, but in that case, it would be 10 meters.
So in this subdivision of 18 units, there'll be a 4.5 meter, I thought I saw a larger rear yard. I thought I saw a rear yard of 6 meters someplace. Or is that wrong? Is it 4.5? Minimum rear yard, 6 meters. So is the 6 meters the same as the 4.5 meters?
Yeah, the 4.5 would be sort of the amenity area, and then an additional 1.5 for a planting strip.
I see, so that's the rear yard.
Yep.
And I think you may be able to clarify this. Because this is a 3-story building, these are 3-story units, this is likely going to be attractive to families?
That was the developer's intent based on his comments he's provided at the public meeting, yes.
Right, and yet there's a 6-meter rear yard. There's request to reduce the landscaped area. There's a request to reduce planting strips, and there are no sidewalks.
We did convey council's comments regarding sidewalks and the other matters to the developer following the public meeting. They did decide to stay the course, so to speak. I think their argument is with the existing narrow frontage, it would have been difficult to accommodate a sidewalk and have a planting strip and have the roadway plus units into the site.
And have 18 units.
Yeah.
Okay, I have no, thank you very much. Any other members of council? Councillor Dubanow.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, Your Worship, perhaps planning staff can clarify this. Would this development be subject to site plan control, or is this within the exception scope based on the provincial, the new provincial regulatory framework?
Do you want me to try to answer that one, or?
If you don't know, Mr. Hurlovich, do you know whether this type of development is subject to site plan approval under Bill 23?
It would not be, because it's not higher than 10 stories and greater, has to be higher than 10 stories or higher and greater than 10 units. Sorry, 5 stories or higher and greater than 10 units.
And if I may, Your Worship, I appreciate that, because I knew that there was the 10 unit there. I didn't realize that there was the height requirement, so that kind of shuts the door on the one issue I was potentially looking to rectify this. With regard to the privacy, I'm just wondering, since we don't have the ability to impose site plan control on this, maybe we can go about, because the amenity space, like I said, I think it's really innovative, and I think it's a real interesting way to work with what would be unutilized space on a property. Maybe just going to the discussion about the methods I can use, perhaps if we have like a setback from the edge of the building itself, maybe, I don't know how many feet it is, but when you have your angle, if you're right at the edge, you can look straight down. If you stand 1 foot away, your angle changes. If you're 6 feet away, you might only just be able to look straight out and not actually be able to look into people's yards. I'm just putting that up there because I really, I wouldn't want to see us eliminate this if there's a way that we can accommodate and find a compromise to keep both of this working. And these are just ideas that I'm throwing out there. I was hoping we might have site plan control, and perhaps, we could have moved to have site plan brought to council for us to actually approve it. But since we can't do that, we'll just continue the discussion tonight and see what we can come up with. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis?
Like you knew it was coming. I just want to go back to one thing, and that is these units are unique to Fort Erie. They're not unique to Ontario, and they are seen more in areas where it's much more urban, along highways, in commercial corridors, similar to the stacked townhouses where you have main floor commercial, upper apartments, and rooftop living space or amenity space. I just want to go back to the reason that we're dealing with this issue, and that is one being the developer putting the proposal. Before going to that, I actually want to go back. Councillor Dubanow, you made a great point, and I do find it an innovative design in the right neighborhood. I don't see anything in the neighborhood around these being 3 stories, certainly not 3 stories with a rooftop patio. That being said, I think the reason, and this is in my opinion, that we're dealing with this is we have a piece of property where the developer is looking, in my opinion, to shoehorn in as many units as they possibly can, making the smallest backyards possible for family units where they have no choice but to put the amenity space on the roof. That is the reality of this situation. I think you actually raise a good point, Councillor Dubanow, when you mentioned the green space. I would have no problem with this being a rooftop pollinator garden, green space on a roof. I think that would actually be quite innovative and actually be attractive to the neighborhood. But the reason we're dealing with this is, again, in my opinion, we have a developer who is trying to get the maximum height on the maximum amount of units on the small piece of property, not doing basements where they could acquire the floor space to accommodate family homes. And the reason for not doing the basement level living space, in my opinion, is because they want to take an approach that I'm going to call, again, in my opinion, a disingenuous marketing ploy to be able to say that these properties are waterfront view or water view. So I actually have kind of changed my mind on the rooftop patio bed. I actually think we should say no rooftop patio with the exception of green space or outdoor pollinator garden. And again, the no short-term rentals in this subdivision. I don't know, Your Worship, if you want others to speak, but happy to move those two amendments. But I would change the rooftop patio to rooftop pollinator garden or green space.
So let's, you had two. What was the other one?
Short-term rentals.
Okay, let's put the short-term rentals on the floor as an amendment. So that would be a condition, an additional condition, no short-term rentals in this subdivision. And do you have a seconder for that?
Councillor Dubanow.
Dubanow. Any questions or comments with respect to that? Madam Clerk, you've got that as an amendment. It would be an additional condition. And you're not feverishly trying to type this into the details, are you?
Not this week.
Okay, so we'll give you a chance to work on that. Okay, so I'm going to call that question. All those in favor of the amendment that there be no short-term rentals in this plan of subdivision? None opposed. That is carried. Okay, your second amendment relates to the amenity space on the roof. And your amendment is?
That there would be no outdoor amenity space on the upper level of the proposed development, with the exception of pollinator gardens and rooftop green space. And if we need to work on the wording, but the intent would be that it not be a patio. And maybe that's what we just say.
Well, I think that's what you just say. I don't think we want to be suggesting what other alternate uses there might be. So what's the heart of what you're trying to accomplish here?
We'll just say no rooftop.
No patio, no rooftop patio. Okay. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Noyes? Any questions or comments on that? Okay. All those in favor of the approval being without a rooftop patio? And all those opposed? So that's going to carry because I'm going to support that.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillors?
Anything further? Then the report as amended is on the floor. And just to reiterate, the amendments are an additional condition with respect to no short-term rentals and a provision that the building can be 3 stories but no rooftop patio. You can have a seat, Mr. Van
Oh,
Veen.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry to keep you up there. I'm going to call the question then. Everybody's clear on it? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried as amended. Okay, that then takes us to PDS 49. And Councillor Christensen, you have the next resolution, PDS 49.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor McDermott, that council direct staff to initiate housekeeping amendments to the town's comprehensive zoning bylaw number 12990 in accordance with the Planning Act, as outlined in report number PDS 49/2023.
Any questions or comments? Councillor Flagg.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a small notation here on page 10 of 10, policies affecting the proposal. It goes through and talks about notification in the Fort Erie Times newspaper. I think that that's probably been something that's been taken from an old old proposal. Fort Erie Times hasn't been around for a while, so.
It hasn't. Good catch. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. On page 6 of 10, 6.40, covered and uncovered porches, balconies, and decks and patios. It talks about, in the other column, it says, consider adding provision to prevent encroachment into required swales. I would rather change that word to consider, but to implement. Like, again, swales have been an ongoing problem with drainage, not consider, but make it a little bit stronger that they will prevent encroachment. And the swales, I know they technically they can't anyway, but they do. I just stronger language there so that they will not encroach. And when they're putting in their patios and their porches, balconies, decks, etc., that they're not going to be encroaching on the swale.
Okay,
It's the consider. It's the part that says consider adding provision to prevent. I wouldn't consider. I would add a provision to prevent.
You said on page 6?
That's on page 6 of 10. 6.40.
Right. Mr. Hurlovich, do we need a formal amendment on that, or is this something that staff can follow up on?
Yeah, staff will be developing the zoning, so we're basically indicating areas that we will be addressing, so we can bring that back with the stronger wording.
Okay.
And council then would have the opportunity to vote on that when they see the bylaw amendment.
Councillor Noyes?
Oh, thank you. And again, this does kind of walk us through all the changes in Bill 29 and what we now have to do to make our bylaws in concert with the new changes. And it does kind of really bring it home that there's a lot that we can't do anymore, that it's kind of taken out of our hands. And, a lot of the things in it I'm not in favor of, but they didn't ask me.
They didn't? Well, that was an oversight, I'm sure. Anyone else? I have a question with respect to, just to follow up on what's on page 6. The second last item is the ornamental structures. There's going to add something about window wells, and wouldn't there be a bit of a problem if there's a required swale? Because if the setback is, it says that the window well can project half a meter, but shall not be closer than a half a meter to any lot line. But that could interfere with a swale, would it not? Could it not? Mr. Hurlovich?
Well, there is a potential for that, but then, we wouldn't be able to create or add the window well if it's going to actually be in the swale.
Right. So there may be circumstances where it is permissible, but others where it just isn't going to work.
Correct.
Okay. And the other question that I had related to an item on page 4, the last item, 6.2, the parking area regulations. And the suggestion is that we might reduce from 1.5 parking spaces per dwelling to 1 parking space per dwelling. Isn't the difficulty then, how do we provide for visitor parking? We have the development that we just approved, subject to amendment, has 31 parking spaces. It's got 18 units, 13 for visitors. Okay, let's suppose that they don't need 13 visitor parking spaces, but surely they will need some. So isn't that a concern that we should be aware of? There needs to be some parking spaces for visitors, and I would have thought that the 1.5 or whatever tries to anticipate that.
Your Worship, that's how we have applied it in the past, is that it was the 0.5 represented the visitor spaces as well as any other use. So it could be units with more than one car, However, the province is basically saying we can no longer require more than one parking space. Maybe we can look at a supplemental requirement. I'll have to explore that with our staff and maybe with our legal counsel as well to see whether there's a workaround. But I would be surprised if we could require it. It might be a nice to have requirement.
Well, the wording here is that we're going to review the parking requirements to see whether it should be changed from 1.5 to 1. So I'm thinking there must be some latitude.
All right.
I can't believe that the province wouldn't anticipate that there might be visitors going to people who live in townhouses, although there have been other things. There have been other things that I've. Hop on.
There's your answer.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So those were the two concerns that I had. Any other questions or comments or concerns? Then I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of moving this forward? That is carried. And that then takes us to new business inquiries. And Councillor Christensen, you have the first resolution relative to the Ridgeway BIA.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor McDermott. The council accepts the resignation of Dr. Kathleen Bailey from the Ridgeway. Council directs staff to proceed with filling the vacancy.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? That is carried. Councillor McDermott, you have the next resolution.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Christensen. The council accepts the resignation of Tricia Lynn Pasha from the Property Standards Committee, and further, council directs staff to proceed with filling the vacancy in accordance with the procedural bylaw.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed. That is carried. Councillor Lewis, you have the next resolution regarding the Crystal Beach BIA.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself begrudgingly, but with Councillor Christensen, that council accepts the resignation of Carolyn Smith from the Crystal Beach Business Improvement Area Board of Management, and further that council directs staff to proceed filling the vacancy in accordance with the procedural bylaw.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? That is carried. Councillor Noyes, you have the next resolution regarding the library board.
Thank you. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Dubanow. The council accepts the resignation of Linda Hodge from the Fort Erie Public Library Board, and further, the council directs staff to proceed with filling the vacancy in accordance with the procedural bylaw.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed. That is carried. The next item under new business or inquiries is the memorandum from the chief building official. And Madam Clerk, we don't need to receive that. We don't need to do anything with it. It's just there.
Mayor Redekop, I was advised through the chief building official that it was for information purposes only. So if you would like to receive for information purposes, it's meant to be follow-up as requested by council.
I think it would be appropriate for us to at least receive it. I have a councillor that would like to move that we receive it. Councillor Flagg, Councillor Christensen, second. Any questions or comments about the memo? All those in favor? That is carried. Any other items of new business or inquiries? Then we have some motions. I'd spoken to Councillor Lewis earlier about the deferral of his motion, Councillor Christensen, Councillor Noyes. Under the rules, we're supposed to be dealing with these, or they're supposed to come off the agenda. So I would ask all of you to have your resolutions ready for the July council meeting so that we can deal with these and move them on. We do, however, have one resolution that more than covers for those that are being deferred. That is the voluminous resolution. It's almost an omnibus resolution in itself. Yeah. Very thoughtful and hopefully not necessary. Councillor Dubanow.
Yeah, Your Worship, I couldn't leave you hanging. I've had such long resolutions during the last term. I just had to get a few in during this one. But thank you very much, Your Worship. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor McDermott, whereas the Fort Erie Racetrack is one of only 2 thoroughbred horse racing facilities in the province of Ontario, having been established in 1897 and operating continuously since then. And whereas in recent years, the Fort Erie Racetrack has been the primary host facility for the B circuit of thoroughbred racing, while the Woodbine Track in Toronto has been the primary facility for the A circuit of thoroughbred racing. And whereas both racetracks host dual races in the Ontario Triple Crown of horse racing, and whereas the Ontario Racing Commission, an agency created by the Government of Ontario, regulates horse racing, and whereas the provincial government has strategies and policies in place to develop and encourage the horse racing industry in Ontario, including funding and incentive programs to grow and expand the industry in the province, and whereas the Fort Erie and Woodbine racetracks are both beneficiaries of these programs, and whereas Woodbine Entertainment, the owners of the Woodbine Track, adopted a stall policy in May 2017 referred to as Race and Stay that prevents horses from stabling at Woodbine if they leave to race at another track more than once, except for races with a purse of more than $20,000. And whereas the Municipal Council of the Town of Fort Erie passed a resolution on May 15th, 2017, requesting the Ontario Racing Commission immediately prohibit Woodbine Entertainment from implementing the Race and Stay program and limitations on the movement of horses between Woodbine and the Fort Erie Racetrack. And whereas the Mayor and members of Fort Erie Council met with the Minister of Economic Development of Growth at the 2017 Association of Municipalities Ontario Conference to discuss the negative impacts of the Woodbine Race and State Stall program on the Fort Erie Racetrack, and whereas the Mayor and members of Fort Erie Council met virtually with officials with the Minister of Finance during the 2020 Association of Municipalities of Ontario Conference to again discuss the Woodbine Race and Stay Stall policy and the negative impacts it has on the Fort Erie Racetrack, and whereas the Mayor and members of Fort Erie Council met with the Parliamentary Assistant to the Minister of Finance at the 2022 Association of Municipalities of Ontario Conference to again discuss Woodbine's Race and Stay program and the negative impacts it continues to have on the Fort Erie Racetrack, and whereas representatives of the Fort Erie Live Racing Consortium have launched a challenge with the Competition Bureau to determine whether Woodbine Entertainment's actions constitute an attempt to create an illegal monopoly, and whereas Woodbine's Race and Stay Stall policy continues to remain in effect through the 2023 racing season, and whereas Woodbine's Race and Stay policy continues to have a devastating impact on the ability of Fort Erie Racetrack to operate successfully and grow Ontario horse racing under provincial objectives, and whereas the Fort Erie Racetrack is a job creator in Fort Erie and the surrounding region, both directly and indirectly, and has contributed to the local economy as well as the history and culture of the area since 1897. Now therefore be it resolved that the Municipal Council of the Town of Fort Erie again requests that the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario immediately prohibit Woodbine Entertainment from continuing the Race and Stay Stall policy, and further that the provincial government put in place a long-term policy to encourage competition and diversification of horse racing in Ontario that would prevent any single track from using their market position to create an unfair monopoly on horse racing in Ontario, including but not necessarily limited to implementing policies that would prohibit monopolistic policies like Woodbine's Race and Stay, and further that the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, Ontario Racing Commission, and the provincial government recognize the contributions of the Fort Erie Racetrack to the growth, history, and culture of horse racing in the province of Ontario,